Okay, so let's test to see is the audio working. It should be. Okay, yep, that seems fine. So I will switch to this. Okay, so there we are. Um, this is going to work very similarly if you were here for the Dawn of Yang Chen spoiler discussion stream, which is just I have a document with actually quite a few notes, but mainly it's just discussion prompts for like characters, mentioning kind of specific things to discuss. But of course, everyone in chat can mention whatever they want, and we can discuss it, and we can kind of come around to things that way. So yeah, this will be a spoiler discussion, just so everyone is completely aware. Outside of maybe the first like 10-15 minutes where I do some of the merchandise kind of opening I said I'd do, we'll be pretty much straight into Yang Chen spoilers. So just be aware of that. I think the stuff on my channel has been pretty good about spoilers, in that I don't think people are getting spoiled by me. But anyway, what we're going to be starting off with is I have two pieces of Avatar merch to open. I'm going to start off with this, which is the 2024 official Avatar calendar, the collector's edition calendar, the comic-themed one for next year. So there's a little bit, I suppose, to talk about here. There's the art print that's inside this, so we'll take a look at that. That's probably the less interesting part of the merchandise. And then the other thing is this. I've had this like all week, waiting to open this. I wasn't expecting it to arrive so early, but this is a blind box Avatar figure. It's one of these new, what's it called, Crystal Fuens figures. So you're not guaranteed Aang. There's actually 7 different ones you can get, including a rare one. So we're going to open this up as well. Very interested to see what we get here, because obviously the whole idea of this, you can see with the Aang, is that they have kind of like clear but kind of like crystal style effect stuff going on. So depending on what we get, that could look actually kind of cool. But yeah, we'll get through the merch stuff, I think, pretty quickly at the start here. I don't think there's really been any news super recently kind of to talk about. So I guess we'll just kind of get straight into the calendar here. I should probably switch actually to this, so we can see this a little bit better. So let me attempt to open this up without ruining it. Okay. Okay, there we go. Now, there's going to be some stuff in this, isn't there? Always, yeah. So yeah, we get our cardboard insert, of course. Nothing going on with this. And then we get our art print, which, as you can see there, this is the Search Part 2, I think, if I remember correctly. So, pretty nice there. I get why they picked part of the Search as kind of the most popular comic. So kind of a nice art print there. Yeah, it says on the bottom, yeah, Search Part 2, Guru July 2013. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty nice. Again, there's nothing too fancy going on here. The paper is like better than just kind of standard paper, but it's nothing super fancy, but it's kind of nice. It feels a bit smaller than like the art prints you got from previous ones, but I guess no, actually there's probably space to make it at least a little bit bigger. I get it's like a comic cover, so it's going to have a different like aspect ratio, but it's still a little bit small compared to I think what we might be expecting. But other than that, like, it is just kind of your standard calendar here. You can see kind of everything on the back. Probably the most notable thing about this is, of course, it's got the Azula in the Spirit Temple cover here, really highlighting, of course, that the book was meant to be out now. So it's very clear that I don't think they had all planned for the book not to have been out by now. So that's kind of unfortunate. Like, I read it, of course, but most everyone else hasn't. And the fact that it's still like 2 months away is still kind of crazy as well. But yeah, let's just take a look through this, see how the quality is. So we open up here with the remainder of the 2023 calendar. So if you don't have a 2023 calendar, you could just get this and do there. This got the Team Avatar Treasury cover here, which is kind of nice. And obviously it's designed differently, of course, because the Kyoshi calendars, which is what they did for the previous 2 years, obviously had more of that cover artist style, whereas this obviously has a little bit more of a kind of clean design here for the actual calendar part. But you can see here, we've got some north and south action going on there. Next month we've got the imbalance stuff going on here. So I like that they're mixing it up. They're using the 2 different creative teams, Gurihuru and Peter Wortman's art. There we go, Suki alone, very nice, including Kyoshi, obviously. So that's March. April, Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy. May is the Rift Part 2, which is very significant for Yang Chen, of course. This is, I suppose, the really, really specific comic to read if you want some of the Yang Chen content that's not in the novels. Promise Library Edition, yes. So that's kind of cool. There we go. Azula in the Spirit Temple, 2 months before release on the calendar here. But it is nice that they included kind of an upcoming comic that they kind of had the art for. So that's for July. Now we've got Smoke and Shadow there. Promise Part 3. Rift Part 3. Search Library Edition for November, and we end with Katara and the Pirate Silver. So that is the calendar, basically. You can see on the back it does mention the novels as well, because of course this is published by Abrams, which is the publisher for the novels. So it is a kind of a little interesting thing that they do. The big thing will be, I suppose, what they do next year. So the, I suppose, 2025 calendar. If they do go with comics, I really hope they mix it up and maybe include the Korra stuff, or actually do what I think most people wanted them to do with this one, which was to choose panels from actually inside the comics rather than just choosing the covers, which is the really obvious kind of promo material for all the comics. Other than that, like, again, what everyone wants is do get new art for the calendar, so that like there's actual kind of like art value to actually buying them. But it's still a pretty nice thing overall. I think it's a relatively recent release. I think the official release date was the 22nd or something like that, but I think some people got it a bit earlier. So that's that. So we'll just put that away. And we'll move on to the figure here, Crystal Friends. So final little bit of information on this is probably the reason I only got one of these, because it's like a blind box, we'll have one figure in this, is these are pretty expensive. Like, for the size that they are, this is a pretty expensive figure. I think this cost me, I think I got it from Amazon for €12. My local comic book store actually has these as well, but they're charging €15. Now, they look like they're relatively good quality, but of course we'll have to wait and see what the size is going to be. So it does mean they're basically priced at in or around the price of like kind of Funko Pops, basically. And then the other comparison would be to the Chibi figures, the Loyal Subjects Chibi figures, which are, I think these cost like about 10. I know in America there's a shop where I think they were selling them for like 5. So that's that situation there. Let's see in chat. Where are you from? I am from Ireland. So there's that. Probably don't say that enough in my videos, but that is the case. So yeah, let's just open this up and see what we get. I suppose really quickly, based on this, I suppose in chat, tell me what you think is in this, but just before I open it up, I suppose. So obviously the idea is Anne, Katara, Sokka, Toph, Zuko, Iroh are your kind of commons. You have an even chance to get any of them, and then the rare one here is Appa and Momo together. Let me know what you think. Myself, I think Sokka would maybe be the only one I'd be a little bit disappointed with, because I want a cool crystal effect part. And I think Sokka, his one doesn't look as kind of cool as the other ones. Sokka would probably be the only one I'm maybe slightly disappointed in, but I think a lot of the other ones actually look pretty nice. The Zuko's pretty cool, stuff like that. But let's see what we have here. So Iroh, the rare one, might get lucky. So yeah, let's see what we get here. So open it up. And what do we have here? Oh, cool. It looks like there's some sort of a card in it. Bit of a spoiler though. Like, you know, this comes in a, you know, silver thing. It doesn't tell you on the actual packet for the figure what it is, but then the base is just packaged separately in a clear one. So you can see here, Earth. I wonder who it is. I have no idea. Who did I get? It's a pretty nice base, though, I will say. Just Earth symbol there. So we got Toph, I'm guessing, unless there's a pretty bad mistake going on here. Actually, I don't need the scissors. Okay, so it's actually quite a reasonably big here. So quite well packaged, actually. The effect parts are done here separately to the top. And then, of course, the figure itself, for anyone wondering. Pretty nice, actually, overall. Yeah, the thing with this is that, like, you can actually tell that it is kind of, it's quite expensive for a small figure, but you can tell it's kind of high quality, like, for the size. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, we just have to assemble this a little bit. So yeah, the earth effect part is just kind of goes along the ground here, and we will put this in. Yeah, I think it just goes on like that. And then Toph goes like this? No? Ah, yes, like this. Okay, there we go. And we just need to get the back foot on. Okay. So you can see Toph there with the earth behind her. It's kind of cool. It's got a kind of crystal kind of effect going on where it's sort of clear, but it has a kind of like almost like amber-like kind of effect going on. So it's like she's bending like gemstone almost. And I think they did a pretty good job overall with the kind of paint. And the pose is, I think, very fitting for her as well. And then the symbol on the base is quite cool. Not to mention it's outlined in green. So I think it's pretty good. Like obviously it's quite an expensive thing, I suppose. If you're trying to go for all of them, it starts to get somewhat expensive. Oh, and I forgot there's actually a whole other piece to add on here at the front. Okay, just there we go. So yeah, there is actually a little extra piece that goes on at the front there. That definitely kind of completes it. So, pretty nice overall. One of those ones where like maybe I'd grab like one more because I think the chances of getting a duplicate are probably pretty low. But you know, it would be pretty disappointing if I did get a duplicate. And then let me just open this little card pack and see what's going on here. So yeah, it is just a tiny little card with the figure. So nothing too crazy going on here. It's kind of glossy, as you can sort of see there. But just cool. Comes with a little bit of a collector's card. Kind of nice. But yeah, I suppose after that, we can get down to, I suppose, quick size comparison, actually. Compared to the chibi figures, like you can see there, they're quite a bit bigger. Like Toph's head is quite a bit bigger than the Katara here. And compared to a Funko Pop, do I have a normal size Funko Pop around super close? It's not an Avatar one, but it's the closest one to me. But you can sort of see here next to a Funko Pop. This is Boruto, of course. You can see it's pretty decently sized, and of course, like the detailing is probably a little bit better on that than your average Funko Pop. But that's that. So now let's get into the Legacy of Yangchen discussion here. So, we, of course, on the channel, I've been discussing this quite a lot already. Done a lot of videos going through the chapters, and this will be more or less outside of the podcast where we still have to do the final 2/3 of the book. This is probably going to be the last major discussion about the full Legacy of Yangchen for quite a while. So, my general thoughts are that, as I kind of summarize here, I do think the book is excellent from a character kind of focus, character dynamic perspective, like throughout. Like as you go through the chapters, the Yang Chen focus, the Kavik focus, the two of them together as a dynamic, as well as other characters throughout the book as well, is super strong. I think the core plot, in terms of how the politics are working out with the the Shang system being the kind of key dynamic of this book, in the same way that like the whole Dao Fei thing was the Kyoshi dynamic, that's strong, and how the combustion bending ties into that. But I think the book is just a little bit held back because it feels like every time you are looking for a big reveal to happen from one of the mystery elements, they really hold back. And it kind of feels weird in a lot of kind of situations in the book that they just decide, yeah, that's enough with Yujinta. Yeah, I think that's enough with combustion bending. Yeah, that's the final Chai Si scene. That's the final Kalyan scene. And there's just enough of them that add up to just a case of, I think they made that decision to not reveal much a few too many times. And it just means I think the book is probably just lacking the kind of bombastic reveals and kind of standout moments that some of the other books I think had. So probably the most notable thing is that there's a bit of an interesting comparison, I think, between the two book twos of each series. So Kyoshi and Yang Chen, that would be Shadow of Kyoshi versus Legacy of Yangchen, is Shadow has these huge, crazy moments, like the big fight with Yoon at the end. The way that all comes to a conclusion is like crazy from a character perspective. You have the huge stuff with Karuk, where you get, in a way, almost just as much reveals about Karuk as you do about, like, Kyoshi in that book. And then there's other kind of like reveals about, like, Fire Nation politics was quite cool. Because the two Yang Chen books kind of mostly dealt with the same thing, one book into another, just with like a shift in Shang City, it meant that, it was the same elements in the first book and the second book, but then they didn't quite overall deliver with some of the big reveals. Like, imagine how this would have been if we had the whole, like, Jujinta Yuyan reveal, and we were coming out of this, speculating, going into a lot of depth about, what do the Yuyan reveals from this book tell us? That's one element. If they had told us more about combustion bending and tied it into kind of the backstory with Chai Si a little bit more, I think that could have been something really huge, because in a way, that's your big element in the two Yang Chen books, is that you are dealing with combustion bending. That's the biggest spoiler coming out of the first book going into the second book, is combustion bending. And I don't think they quite delivered with what they decided to do with that so much. And it really feels like they're pushing that out for, like, we'll tell you more about combustion bending someday, but there's not an obvious Yang Chen book 3 coming next. And that's kind of where maybe another slight element comes in of like, the ending feels abrupt here, and it really, really feels like there probably should be a third Yang Chen book, because there is a lot to immediately expand on. But I suppose we could talk more about the ending as we go forward. Let's see in chat. Yes, reading for the books. The Yang Chen and Kavik companionship dynamic has been overlooked. Yes, in terms of the broad like overviews and reviews that you've seen of this book online, definitely it is odd when you see a review that doesn't like mention the character arc of Yang Chen, or doesn't mention Kavik's character arc, or the two's dynamics together. It feels like, why are you not talking about the main thing in the book in a way? And it's like, you know, I get it, like a lot of people want maybe some of the other stuff, like say, I'm not even talking about like past Avatar stuff here, because I think they dealt with that relatively well with how the first book came to an end, and the little bit that's in this book I think worked quite nicely. But yeah, the character stuff is obviously the real highlight kind of throughout this, because that's kind of what we're doing as we go into this. Like, I have a section on characters here, and then I actually don't really have a section on just like kind of almost specific like detail elements, just because I didn't feel like the book maybe presented them as much. So I suppose as we get into this, like, we'll just be kind of going through it character by character. You know, by all means mention a lot of the stuff. So that's kind of the big thing here. And I want to make it clear here that I don't think this is the only book of the 4 that has criticisms associated with it. Shadow, while it has those big bombastic kind of moments, is also probably structurally towards the end one of the weaker books, because like Heiran and Rangi go missing for like an entire third of that book, and this book kind of really highlights, with the use of Kavik, kind of the time and detail you wish kind of Rangi got a little bit more. That you really wish Rangi kind of got the kind of Kavik treatment a little bit more than she ended up actually doing. So it's a tricky one where, like, I think in general the kind of YA style, it does maybe struggle to balance like a lot of the characters. I would say overall the Yang Chen books probably do it better, because I think you come out of this with like just enough on Jujinta, even though some of the big reveals you wish they had delivered. I think they did just enough big stuff with Taegum and Akudan to make them feel more important. Whereas in Shadow, like Kirima and Wong at the end just kind of feel like, oh yeah, and we need you two to show up. And I like Kirima and Wong, it's just they never did like really anywhere near as much as they did with Taegum and Akudan. So, you know, there is that to be kind of laid on it as well, is that I do think both duologies have struggled a little bit on how to end, because they clearly decide that they just want to end this specific story. But there's also a sense, I think, when you read it where, like, well, we don't know when we're ever coming back to this era, so could we have a little bit more kind of resolution on the era overall? And especially in a book called like The Legacy of Yangchen, this felt like you could have done a little bit more of an epilogue about, she is now the leader of all Shang cities, what does she do from here? You could actually like tell us a little bit more. In terms of next book, that's what people want to know about straight away. I think they're obviously going to go on to a different avatar. I think that's the kind of big thing, is that they are definitely moving on to a different avatar. I'd be surprised if the next book just was randomly another Kyoshi or a Yang Chen book. The big thing, though, is that it does seem to be the case that FCE probably is not going to be the author. Though, I don't know, there's been a little bit of conflicting statements, but it's basically the afterword in the book combined with his like Instagram post, like very much lean in the direction of he's done, at least for now. Whereas he did an interview with an outlet, and he the interview even added in a bit that was kind of like, he doesn't know what's happening next, but he answered a question as if like, if he was to do another book, he would probably do Avatar Zito. Now, I ultimately wouldn't read into that like the next book is confirmed to be Zito and it's going to be written by FCE. That is very different from an actual book announcement. So I'm pretty convinced that we're getting a different Avatar. Now, I've always said it, I think Roku, I think is probably the most likely candidate, because the Avatar Legends RPG already has the foundation of his era in place, at least in a specific point in his era. And I think there is room to do an interesting plot with him in a kind of YA setting that's like somewhere in the middle of his Avatar journey, because you would assume that this is maybe a Roku who maybe only has maybe one or two elements, because he seemed to take the time you need to master the elements style thing. And it would be interesting to see how you do the Avatar getting the full lengthy kind of training and, you know, picking up with them in the middle of it. Whereas we've often dealt with avatars who have to learn on the fly, or like in the case of Yang Chen, is a complete fully realized avatar at 17. And you maybe want to see what more of that normal style is like. And then, of course, the Roku era, just in general, it feels like it's the final kind of like piece of the puzzle in terms of just this overall giant grouping of avatars to bring that together. I know people want Zito. I think that a Zito book could work, definitely. Like I think you can do it. I think there is setup from this book to highlight that it is more than just like office work, the book. There's teases that there's obviously, you know, basically Zito and Yang Chen are maybe more similar than we think, and that some of the stuff that she has had to do, likely he had to do as well. And it's just her coming to realize that, oh, got to strap myself in, that this is what this experience is going to be like. Other than that, I would love to go like all the way back and do like Avatar number 2, Avatar number 3, 4, 5. I wouldn't mind going to say like Avatar 20, right in the middle of like a gap where there's absolutely nothing either side of it on the timeline, and it's just free space absolutely everywhere, but it's maybe still early in the timeline enough to where you have a world that we don't obviously understand, and that like there's interesting situations where like you could do a book set prior to the formation of the Southern Water Tribe. You could do a book where Ba Sing Se is still an underground city and it actually isn't like the typical capital that we know anymore. And there's stuff like that as well. I would love to see the Avatar who was around when the South actually formed and what was going on during that time. And that's obviously with the Avatar focus, which Chronicles of the Avatar seems to be, but there's definitely room to do like pretty much anything else. Like, there's a lot of stuff here where it's like, young Iroh novel, non-Avatar focused novels is, I think, something we probably do need to get around to. Red Lotus, White Lotus origins, absolutely. What else here? Sozin's sister, so Zaysan, is interesting because in many ways, coming out of the RPG material, you would say Zaysan is probably the more interesting plot element over Roku himself. So it would be interesting to see how they actually like approach to kind of like doing that overall. But we should probably get into the discussion here while we're here. So we'll jump in here, and I start off and I have some just general kind of comments here about Yang Chen. I didn't really spend too much time writing these. I pretty much was just like, I typed out Yang Chen and I was just like, write a sentence that is like a plot element involving Yang Chen. And some of this stuff is stuff I've said in like reviews before and stuff like that, but these are just like elements of her character that kind of all come together. So some of this stuff is relating to Dawn of Yang Chen as well as Legacy of Yang Chen. So we have stuff like, the sheer effort she puts in. Like, this is the core characterization that I think you don't maybe see enough people talk about. And it's just the idea of a extremely competent avatar putting in like more than the required effort to do everything she can, to fix everything that she can, and how she encounters sort of like nothing but hurdles being presented in front of her. Like, that is the presentation at the start of Dawn. It's in many ways the presentation in a lot of the cases, as we go through this book as well, is that this is why we have a tired and frustrated Yang Chen kind of as we go through this book, is that she is, they basically imply within the book, she's kind of driving herself into an early grave with the sheer effort that she's putting in. Like, the little subplot with the tea throughout the book is actually like quite interesting, because like Kavik is paying attention to it, and of course Yang Chen's paying attention to it, and then just that little moment where like Kavik literally just drinks like a drop of that spirit tea, and he nearly dies. He nearly has a heart attack from the energy overload that happens here. So it just gives you the sense of like, you can never accuse Yang Chen of not putting the effort in, and then she has all of the skills needed to make things happen, but she still can't just like guarantees that things happen. And that's the kind of whole idea of the character here. Like, this is like, in a way, the kind of presentation here is like, it is Yang Chen facing kind of a lot of the problems that like Korra faced during Korra, but Yang Chen has all the political like experience and training required to be an expert in how she actually handles herself around those world leaders, whereas Korra was like very inexperienced, and she still can't make it all work. But I also like this point here, which is the idea that she is almost like ashamed of the things that she actually has to do to get anything done. So all the praise, adulation that she gets, she feels is just unearned as well. And that's what's so strong about which chapter is it? I think it's chapter 2, how it ends, of like, she's there among the audience which absolutely loves her because of what she's accomplished, but she can never tell anyone how she accomplished it because they would doubt her. And I think that's the kind of fascinating thing of this, about the whole dual aspect of Yang Chen, where she goes on, the legacy of Yang Chen goes on to be that she is basically the ideal perfect avatar, but it's kind of unknown that she was this expert spy master who had to kind of do a lot of manipulation, kind of almost underhanded tactics to achieve anything because of the era that she was involved in. In a way, because of the era that she was born into, that kind of Zito set up to a certain degree, where it's the big business power, how much money you have, that sort of thing is what kind of wins the day. That's kind of a whole dynamic as part of the era. Let's see. Thoughts on Kavik Yang Chen. Kavik X Yang Chen, the ship. This probably I should mention here, because I don't think I have this down anywhere, because it's like, it's more an interpretation type thing. My thoughts on that is that within the book as we saw it, I don't think anything was like inherently romantic, but as we go forward, I can see it going either way, where if you don't see it, fair enough, but if you do see it, I'm kind of like, when Yang Chen isn't busy to the highest degree and she has more time to focus on personal matters, I can maybe see the romantic relationship in her life, if she has one, being with Kavik, because I think there's at least the minor tease throughout the book of kind of little moments where it's like, yeah, I think this could work, and stuff like that. So that's kind of my thoughts on it, where like I'm never too much of a sort of speculative shipper where I go heavily into I support this ship when there's no like really clear cut like this scene was absolutely clearly romantic. So it's just like whichever way they decide to go with it, that's fine. But I think it's relatively clear that it was not part of the kind of writing intent to really kind of like be there really. So I don't know, an interesting one. Is there anything else to add? Like, of course there was the direct like funny dynamic in this book where they acted like they were in a relationship and stuff like that. And you get the really hilarious scene where the maid comes into the room and sees that there's a man in Yang Chen's room who stayed the night, and it's just the most dramatic piece of gossip imaginable. That's a fun scene. But obviously, you contrast that with then how almost business-like, in a way, the scene kind of was for them. That it was like acting, flirting, they get into the room and it's like just dead serious. So there's that. But yeah, you can get there if you absolutely want to, is probably the idea there. This is the other point. Yeah, she hates that the key players in her era will always care more about money and power than trying to improve things for the people. And you can see this, like, this is presented obviously all throughout Dawn, and in the early parts of Legacy, she still tries to kind of do things in sort of the idealistic way of like, you should help people because you actually want to help people, not just because helping people will ultimately result in you getting more money. But the whole book, in a way, is kind of about Yang Chen kind of accepting that, like, this is the way the era is. I will adapt and basically become the best at doing things in this way. That is the only way to kind of, in a way, win and own her own era effectively. And that's what the solution by the end of it is that Yang Chen has her own secret combustion bender to use as a way to basically manipulate, blackmail people. She controls all trade in the entire world effectively, and effectively can put money wherever it needs to be. And that's how she's doing things, by just becoming the wealthiest person in the world, the person with the most power, but ultimately someone who still cares about helping people in the end. But she knows she'll never get it done if she focuses on doing things in the way she almost wishes people would want to do it. And that's a bit of an interesting kind of arc for her, is just kind of realizing that that's how it has to be, that she can change the Shang merchants to a certain degree, but they still kind of are who they are, and that's the whole idea of it ultimately. Then this arc, I think, is very interesting. The idea of, like, her, and will she give up on humanity because she feels that, like, they just refuse to, like, basically help themselves. Yang Chen can set things up perfectly for specific people, a group of people to thrive if they just take this specific direction, but very rarely do they ever just do that. And it frustrates her to no end that it feels like humanity is, like, inherently self-destructive. And this is where we get the whole idea of Avatar Gun in the past also had a moment where he nearly gave up on humanity. And we know, of course, Avatar Gun didn't, and we know that Yang Chen doesn't. But the Avatar state moment in the first kind of third of the book is super interesting. Because she, like, the idea of, like, oh yeah, what if she just, like, stayed in the Avatar state and just became this, like, god avatar controlling kind of people and really enforced her will on them. And then there's the kind of opposite approach of, like, what if she just took a step back completely, which is what she was planning to do at the very end of Dawn, until she got that moment of hope when she was right on the edge that the boy had been found. And that's the moment, like, they kind of in a way set up this arc right at the end of that first book of, like, this is kind of what she is dealing with. It's a very well done one, and I'll get into other elements of that as we go forward. Did you like the Kalyan baby daddy reveal? We'll get to that. It's one of those ones where, like, the reveal itself is like, excellent, cool, makes sense. Now do something with it. And outside of just the kind of, I think, basic dynamic of, like, it creates a family connection between Kalyan, Chaisi, and then the child, they don't really do anything with it because those three basically never interact with each other, really. We have one scene of Chai-Si and the child, and then otherwise, like, none of the other characters interact with each other. But we'll get to that when we get to the other characters. With Yang Chen, of course, yeah. And then this is, I think, one of the cooler parts of the book, is especially the Iwashi scene, where he explains, like, you know, after that big party he threw when he became Zongdu. That hits Yang Chen so hard because, in a way, that is exactly how she feels about the whole thing. And this is what's so interesting, is just the idea of, like, they really play on the idea of, like, kind of what the Avatar's kind of world leadership position is here. Now, Yang Chen is given the role of a Zongdu as well here, but against other equivalent kind of people, you see that here are the various kind of almost like different paths that Yang Chen might go down if she truly chooses to kind of give up on people. Whereas, like, Iwashi gave up on people, and look at the way he is. Look at the way he views his people. He just wants nothing to do with them because, in his mind, they slighted him that day. They slighted the previous Zongdu and only care about, like, what he can offer them, so he backed away completely. Chai-Si is, like, an example of someone who just, like, uses people effectively. And Yang Chen, of course, has some elements of Chai-Si, but ultimately can't bring herself to ever go that far. And I think you see that throughout the entire book, is just the idea of, yeah, like, she can't ever truly step away from it. And she can't step away from, like, other people, their humanity, but especially she can't, like, get rid of her own. And this is where you see a lot of those kind of... The book makes a big point about, on multiple occasions, mentioning the idea of basically making the rational decision or the sort of more kind of emotionally, morally kind of correct decision that more relates to kind of family and protecting people. And the answer throughout the whole book for Yang Chen is that she can't really bring herself too often to just make the rational choice. She can never bring herself to really, like, sacrifice or use people in the way that many of the other kind of leaders want to use people. And multiple times throughout the book, you see her do this, where it seems like suicide, but she jumps up to try and save Ming-Yer and saves him in the end. She should just eliminate the three members of Project Unanimity, but she keeps them alive. Especially, like, after everything goes wrong, she still chooses to keep Ying-Su alive. And that moment of kind of her realizing that, like, you know, if this choice is not correct, then I can't have faith in anything, effectively, is a really interesting one. So yeah, this whole idea of these two choices, and we see this with the likes of Oyaluk, but it also comes up with actually quite a few of the villains as well. And in the end, they want to make the rational choice, but because they have these goals that kind of relate to family, they're kind of forced into making an emotional choice. And the way they kind of frame it at different points is kind of very interesting. So, and then, yeah, the losses here, of course. So we, of course, know about Jetson, but the big one in this book is, of course, the death of Nujian, which I think everyone is in agreement, like, this is the most shocking thing we have maybe ever read in an Avatar novel, was the moment Nujian died, in terms of how suddenly it happened in that chapter. It's like a random, 4-page chapter, I think it was, right after everything seemed to be calming down after some of the kind of mystery reveals on the island, how quickly it turned, and you go from feeling that, like, they have an advantage to suddenly, I don't know if Yang Chen could come back from this. And it's a strong kind of point in the book to kind of place her in a position of, like, you don't know where she stands, heading into effectively the confrontation with Chai-Si. That's really interesting, because she's already, like, considering giving up, and then this is the moment kind of where you think that's where it should happen. And it's so interesting. And they ultimately come back to this, the whole idea of like her final hope that like she's putting it all on is just that, show me that decisions to kind of show mercy are correct. What would it mean for her if her choice to show mercy was wrong? I think that the way they frame that kind of decision surrounding like the reveal that Ying Su is actually alive is really good for the character, because it's just this idea of, if Yang Chen sort of found out that the right choice was to kill 3 people just because they would affect the world kind of in an interesting way when they're ultimately just being used as assets, that is a thing that would, I think, really like hurt her, but it works that she actually made that choice ultimately. And then, yeah, I talked about this at the start again, but come back around to it. Like, she embraces what is needed. Like, she kind of becomes the perfect Shang merchant. She becomes the perfect Zongdu at the end. She accepts that, okay, I'll make my decisions ultimately with the intent of trying to help people, but I'll play things your way and I'll win. And that's the kind of takeaway at the end. And it's really clever, of course, because she gains control of 4 Shang cities and, thus can have an influence on the overall world. And she does it again by using her own combustion bending asset, who she's now friends with, instead of only treating as an asset. So that's a different dynamic than everyone else. She actually earned and truly kind of like won Ying Su's trust, which is very different than literally Chai-Si had a brainwashed Thapa on her side. Like, complete opposite sides of the kind of spectrum here in terms of like where the loyalty actually is. And the idea of like ultimately what it becomes is that like the combustion bending, like Ying Su effectively is this kind of deterrence to war. The idea of like Fei Shan, known for being this kind of menace when it comes to creating conflict between the nations, he can't go to war and get his quote-unquote vengeance against the other nations, because, as Yang Chen says at the end, if you do, I will give my combustion bender to your enemies, and you've now seen it in action. Can you deal with it? And the answer is ultimately no. And that's a super interesting idea at the end. It's Yang Chen being so bold at the end of this book. Like, it's just such an aggressive move here. Whereas the book in a way often highlights that it's the truly clever people who think it all through. But Yang Chen kind of wins by just being a little bit on the wild side at the end of the book, by really playing this kind of wild game of chicken with Chai-Si, and then putting the Earth King at risk. It's a huge kind of moment in the end. Now, obviously, where the book ends for Yang Chen, is it enough where they leave it? And I think this is kind of part of the problem when you call it the book The Legacy of Yang Chen. And the book kind of just ends with the idea of like, okay, she's going to improve things, but how exactly does it happen? And of course, we know as we go from era to era, we don't know what a Shang City is when we go to other eras. These aren't mentioned ever. At least they aren't mentioned as being Shang Cities. The likes of Taku, of course, we see in Avatar, but it is historically recognized as a notable kind of city for trade. Not that it was a former Shang City type thing. This is this kind of extra reveal that gets added onto it. So what kind of happens in the immediate aftermath of the book is the kind of real question. Because also, it's clear, the Platinum Affair does eventually come to an end. How does that happen? So, it seems like Yang Chen probably just has enough control at this point at the end that in time it ends. The likes of, I suppose, Ganryu, Oiluk probably die, and their successor, they're probably more open to, coming to the right agreements that Yang Chen would like. Yang Chen now has a little bit more control over Fei Shan. Fei Shan, probably is okay with sort of starting again a different relationship with different leaders. Because again, remember how young Fei Shan is. He's going to be around for quite a while, just like Yang Chen. So I think she's stuck with the same Earth King for quite a bit. That's the real kind of question you have as you go forward in the book, is just how quick or not does it happen that like the Shang cities change from being Shang cities to just being kind of noted cities for trade. That's a bit of an interesting one that you wonder when that kind of happens. And then the Platinum Affair ending, that's a big deal, because we basically know, like, it is part of quote unquote Yang Chen's legacy that she creates all these kind of trade negotiations, treaties with different groups and stuff like that. That's the kind of whole idea of a lot of this stuff as well, is kind of like, how does that all end up playing out? So let's see. Let's see. Livestream video is off. Is it? It's working for me at the moment. All my information says it's live. Okay, so I guess it's just a individual problem there. Because what's this say here? Yeah, it says 0 dropped frames, so I don't think anything has happened on my end. So yeah, that's that one. It's just like, as the book comes to an end, does it do enough to actually end its core plot in a way? And I'm okay with it ending, and like, you don't know exactly, when or the exact details of how the Platinum Affair ends or how the Shang cities eventually go away, but I just wish there was a little bit more to it. Is kind of the idea. Now, we get into a bit of the character arc here. Now, again, keep in mind, Kavik is up next. I still have a little bit more Yang Chen to go through. Kavik is up next. We can discuss Kavik's side of it a little bit more as we go on. But just for Yang Chen specifically, her view on Kavik, more so than, I suppose, Kavik's overall perception and things. So I think what's very clear as you start the book is that it feels like she's missing the role Kavik played in the book. He is the true companion that she needs. He offers something that none of the others offer. Taegum and Akudan are very loyal to her, of course, but she definitely needs companions that are around her age, and so she can actually interact with. Like, she needs the friendship angle on things as well. And while I'm sure she gets on very well with Taegum and Akudan, you could see the kind of idea of it being kind of, quite a generation or two, like, between those characters. Jujinta, similarly, you get the idea he is not the most sort of sociable character, and especially with sort of his view on Yang Chen, where he kind of looks up to her so much because he respects her so much as the Avatar. You can maybe see how through Jujinta, maybe she's not quite getting what she gets. She needs someone who is more of a kind of equal to her when it comes to her approach to things, the way she thinks about things, and that is Kavik. That's who she needed. That's why, like, the start of Dawn is so strong at getting across the idea of there is a little bit of a connection between the two, even while their relationship is kind of like weird, and it starts out where like she's basically just hiring him for like a mission, but then there's like a true friendship that develops, and there's all this awkwardness that gets in the way of it. But the whole time through you can see that it's like he is 100% the Avatar companion that she needs, and it's just, in a way, open the door for him to come back in the best way possible is the kind of idea. And that's the big thing, because the other thing is that, like, like Brittany mentions in chat there, he is the one who sort of like notices all the little kind of issues going on with her. Like, the others don't notice the stuff with like the tea. They don't notice as much that she's like truly exhausted and pushing herself beyond her limits. but Kavik does. Like, he has that sort of like perception because he doesn't have the kind of over respect for like what she is as the Avatar, that he can't just see like her as a person. So that's a very, very cool, interesting kind of idea on that side of things. But what I really like about the way they did it is that they ultimately, when it comes to Kavik's betrayal, chose to not just do it in a way where it's all on Kavik to kind of make amends. That's there in the book, him trying to make amends, of course, and we'll get to that with Kavik. But I like that they bring up the Yang Chen side of things, that she does actually sort of reflect on the idea of how can she like fairly, in a way, give him a chance to redeem himself, when she really has it set in her mind that because I can't ever tell if you are telling the truth or not, I don't know if I can ever truly trust you again. And that kind of, in a way, that's what kind of gets in the way. She's basically almost let this inability to read him fully get in the way of her forgiving him. That, you know, honest attempts are met with suspicion. And then because she treats him this way, he begins to view their relationship as being a bit more like it was more at the start of the book, where, oh, I just work for you. Do you forget that, like, I work for the Order of the White Lotus? And, you know, the complex issues come back into play because they're not communicating at the level they should be communicating at. And then there is the Kalyan critique of Yang Chen. The idea of you are holding a knife to his conscience is, I think, the exact wording that they say. That is a big one, because you can tell this is where it begins to really make her question, like, oh, he's following me here. Is he doing it because he really wants to, or because he feels he has to? And this becomes a bit of an important thing for Yang Chen as the book kind of goes forward, is she doesn't truly know, in a way, what it is. Because again, she can't read him as clearly as she can read most people. So even his attempts to redeem himself, it's like, what way are you doing this? Are you doing this in the right way or the wrong way? And there's so many complexities that kind of come into it here. And the idea of, like, she can't tell when he's being absolutely truthful in a way. And even by the end of the book, he has to be like, get like jokey, kind of super annoyed at her. And it's only kind of then when he starts kind of like bantering with her that, like, she can see, like, there's the kind of true dynamic coming out more. And that's the strength of like this, of like, we get so many of these things of like, you know, there's a key point, especially when she kind of effectively says the idea of like, has she in a way made this happen by, in the early days, and then especially with how she reacted to the betrayal at the end of the first book, has she like defined their relationship in terms of like, owing her, you have to make amends for that, in that, you know, even in the first place, you have to work for me because I caught you trying to steal from me. And then in this book, you have to work for me because you betrayed me. And that's kind of getting in the way because she's focused so much on that the true friendship and the idea that he is like the perfect companion can't ever really come to the forefront, because there's all these layers of what is the nature of their relationship or business to make it actually work. And even her acknowledging that, like, was the way she handled the betrayal like too much of an extreme, given that she kind of realizes that there was probably eventually going to be a reunion between the two of them eventually, but the way she turned him into an asset and literally called him that at the end of the first book made it so difficult for them to actually kind of forgive him going into this one. And that's interesting, of course, just by itself. And of course, it takes Kavik finally doing kind of an act where he finally, in a way, gives up something himself that is the kind of true kind of proof that she can see within him that he's fully on her side. But when you're reading the book, you can tell that Kavik is, like, he's Team Yang Chen the whole way through this. Like, the individual scenes where Kavik, like, interacts with the Order of the White Lotus, you can tell he's kind of having the exact same reaction that Yang Chen would have if she heard the Order of the White Lotus say the things that he was hearing them say. That's a huge point in this as well. There's also the Jetson stuff that we probably do need to get into here. I think I roughly have this in kind of like order of like what happens in the book. But the Jetson thing, they bookmark it, of course. She doesn't see Jetson at the start, but gets to the area where she is. She encounters the Fog of Lost Souls, the spirit, of course. And we find out Jetson is immune to the fog. She's at peace and perfectly willing to help others who are trapped in the fog. And the relief for Yang Chen, there's a bit of confusion because she's stunned by how calm Jetson is. After all these years, them finally meeting each other again, and Jetson's just like, hey, what are you doing here? And then Yang Chen is like in tears, but it's like, why are you upset? Like, I saved you, I ended up here, it's fine. And it's such a unexpected in a way for it to kind of actually happen. And the advice from Jetson to Yang Chen is, you know, the whole idea of like, don't focus so much on the missed opportunities to help people. Don't focus on what slipped through your fingers. Focus on what you can kind of reach out and actually kind of interact with. That's what Jetson does with all the people in the fog. She can only help the people in front of her. And Yang Chen needs to do the same. That, in a way, Yang Chen's so focused on the big picture of how can I help everyone? How can I help the world? That she almost like only focuses on the failures and not the fact that she has positively affected like the world through different interactions and so on. That's really cool. And then also the kind of almost surprise advice in a way of, you know, like any relationship, accept that there will be things that you get frustrated by, that you hate. Always frustrations. But once you never stop kind of caring, it's fine. And that kind of comparison of like Jetson being like, oh yeah, there were times I hated you. You like changed the course of my life, but I loved you. And basically that advice being like, this is how you need to be the Avatar. You know, always try to do the job, but you're allowed to be frustrated by aspects of the job as well. And that's an interesting kind of very like obvious piece of advice, but it works, I think. Because again, this is the point where the Jetson dynamic here is the equivalent of the Kyoshi Yang Chen scene in Shadow. So instead of an Avatar Zito scene with Yang Chen, we get the more emotional one with Jetson. Because of course they've already set up the idea, what's a past Avatar going to say to Yang Chen? That would be significant. And the idea is ultimately nothing that she hasn't already figured out by talking to them already. And that's why we ultimately don't get a big monumentous Yang Chen and the past Avatars scene. Because as we'll address the scene with Yang Chen and Kyoshi and why it works so well for Yang Chen as a character. But we get this final thing, of course, which I really like. As they go into like the final kind of chapter and stuff like that, she's already forgiven Kavik. There's a final moment of like, oh, you're just doing this out of an obligation, let's go back. But no, he wants to help her out because he truly cares about her. He even says, because you deserve it, I think is what he says. And even just the idea that she wants to kind of challenge herself to like have to trust him because she ultimately does trust him. She doesn't want it to be easy, but she gets the easy thing because the fog shows her the absolute truth on a spiritual level of how Kavik feels about the situation. And so there is no doubts to be had ultimately. That's the whole thing. Let's see. I still wonder what the first thing Zito said to Yang Chen. Definitely, like there's still an interest in terms of like I would have at some point in the book liked to have seen a scene with her talking to a past life. It didn't need to be a final scene, but like it would have been nice if it is so easy for her to just do it about one thing or another. But obviously thematically the whole point with the Yang Chen stuff is to highlight that she doesn't get much value out of what the past lives have to say. But final thing with Yang Chen is I want to really highlight here how FCE utilized all of the previous appearances from Yang Chen to help kind of to construct her character kind of almost in reverse from those moments. So we have up first here, I think, yeah, technically, like the first time really that we saw it, Yang Chen, where she actually says something. It's escape from the spirit world, Yang Chen. And so Ang asks the question to Yang Chen. It made me wonder, why is the Avatar spirit a human in every life? Wouldn't it be better if the Avatar was an all-powerful spirit that never died? And Yang Chen's answer is really interesting. Again, think about this in the context of what we now know about Yang Chen. I don't think so. The Avatar must be compassionate towards all people. And the only way to do that is to live with them. The Avatar must experience sadness, anger, joy, and happiness. By feeling all these emotions, it helps you understand how precious human life is, so you will do anything to protect it. If you were an all-powerful spirit living on top of some mountain, you wouldn't have much in common with an ordinary person. So the Avatar continues to take human rebirth, and with each life learns what it means to be human. And that's great, because you can see that this is very clearly the case. Because I think we know this is how kind of FCE kind of operates, is that I think he said in the past, his preference is to work with avatars where we at least know a little bit about them. And so he's using everything to his advantage here. So here is Yang Chen has come to some sort of a conclusion and has in a way thought before about the avatar's humanity. And so she has an arc at some point in her life about her humanity. And this is about her doubting humanity, trusting that her own decisions where she makes more emotional choices are the correct ones as well. That you're allowed to make mistakes. That's her takeaway. That's one of the best scenes in Dawn of Yang Chen is the scene with a Yunarak. Why our Yunarak is like, you have the ability to basically tell us the entire history of the Avatar. Tell us how to make a new gilded era. And Yang Chen's just like, in my mind, there was no gilded era. I've talked to dozens upon dozens upon dozens of avatars. All of them have regrets. All of them made mistakes. That's what Escape from the Spirit World is about. She learns about the mistakes, effectively, of all the previous avatars that Aang speaks to. And so Yang Chen is basically summing that up at the end of that here. She's heard about Roku's mistake, Kyoshi's mistake, Karuk's mistake. And here is Yang Chen being like, the avatars are human. None of them are perfect. And that's why you don't stay in the avatar state and govern over people like a god, is because you have to know what it means to be human and accept that, in a way, someone with all this power still being human, that tells you like the whole story ultimately. That's the huge point. And then we have her advice to Aang in the finale. So original masters. So we have Avatar Aang. I know that you're a gentle spirit and the monks have taught you well, but this isn't about you. This is about the world. The monks taught me that I had to detach myself from the world so my spirit could be free. Many great and wise air nomads have detached themselves and achieved spiritual enlightenment, but the Avatar can never do it, because your sole duty is to the world. Here's my wisdom for you. Selfless duty calls you to sacrifice your own spiritual needs and do whatever it takes to protect the world. And then what happens to Yang Chen in this book? We see a moment where she's exiled from the Northern Air Temple. So her, spiritual needs, relating to like her really wanting to remain an air nomad and uphold those traditions as much as possible. She doesn't want to get exiled from these places, but she accepts them. That's why it's such an emotional scene where Kavik is like, no, make him reverse this. But she's like, no, I have to take this punishment because I did something that kind of went against kind of the way we operate. I have to be held accountable for this. But then there's also the little bit where like the idea that she has to kill Thapa, and she talks about how like, she doesn't know how her people will necessarily accept the fact that she killed him. And it's very similar to the Kelsang situation of like, is she considered dishonored in a way by certain temples because they know this and that about her. But the idea fundamentally is that Yang Chen was kind of willing to sacrifice her spiritual needs to do what is needed to protect the world. But she still cares about people. Like, we go from literally a chapter of her noting that, like, the mercy of, like, saving Ying Su to basically a chapter where she kills Thapa. And those two things can be the case. That's the kind of whole idea here. And that's super strong. And it obviously, it's more, in that case, it's meant to be like Aang takes a different path so that he doesn't have to kill the Fire Lord in that specific moment. And it means so much more that he didn't in that specific instance. But for the likes of Yang Chen, Kyoshi, even Karuk, they had their reasons for why they had to, kill. And that's just interesting by itself. Then we get to the Rift, which in many ways is probably the best of the lot in terms of defining the character. Now, I just chose this page because I think it shows the idea of she makes the agreement with Old Iron. It's her talking to Aang about this kind of agreement, ultimately, that she made. And this is the thing that she will go to reflect on as being, this was her failing as an avatar, is how she came up with these deals with spirits. And the Old Iron incident will specifically go down in history as like, that was the one, because it's such a notable event. So, I'm quite happy with the way that's worded here. I think it is wonderfully used as an event that basically created the Yang Chen we meet at the start of Dawn, where we obviously find out that the aftermath of the Rift, what we don't see in the Rift, the idea that the people of Tianhaishi needed to be relocated because the deal was to abandon and revert the area back to the way it was. So one of the great cities of the era had to be completely abandoned. And so a lot of people needed to be relocated. And this is where this other side of Yang Chen came from. What she needed to do to help all of these people created that character. But then, more related to this book, her doubt in humanity, her frustrations. This is where you see her beginning to kind of see things in the way Old Iron was. That, she doubts her humanity, so she's leaning more into the spirit side of being the avatar, and like, what if I was just the powerful spirit? I view humanity in the same way Old Iron viewed humanity, as meddling and getting in the way. And they cause problems more than anything. And that's interesting. There are multiple times where she refers back to this specific encounter from multiple perspectives. The idea of the fight was one of the most reckless things she's probably ever done. The agreement itself kind of maybe having some flaws to it. Everything about it is super, super interesting overall. That's fantastic. And then, this then links into the Shadow of Kyoshi appearance from Yang Chen when she talks to Kyoshi. Her approach with dealing with the spirits. And the idea that's interesting as part of this, all of those deals that she created afterwards, like the ones that Karuk eventually deals with, most of these are deals that happen after the books that we've just been through. So she places a certain faith in humanity to keep up these deals with the spirits. And given that she ultimately, like, her reflection is that she sides with humanity over the spirits in these deals, that's an interesting one as well. She, like Avatar Goon, ultimately doesn't turn her back on humanity and tries to help them as much as possible. But of course, these deals were broken. This is what causes the dark spirits that Karuk then has to deal with overall. This, highlights how she never lost that faith. She still made these deals hoping humanity would uphold them, even though they didn't. And she probably knew after a certain amount of time, especially after the Sauwon clan, that they maybe wouldn't be upheld. That's the kind of big thing. And then, this is what she says. Like, there's 2 points in this scene that she says. And that is, I gave each nation everything it wanted, but only realized my error too late. People shouldn't have everything they want. No one is entitled to their every desire. To live in balance, we must willingly decide not to take all that we can from the world and from others. And in a way, this is an interesting one when it comes to Yang Chen's success as we're presented with at the end of this book. She seems to succeed in helping a lot of people gain money, everywhere becomes more wealthy, everywhere improves overall, but does she create a situation where there's maybe a little bit too much success and maybe allows for kind of greed to sort of take over a little bit? And is that kind of what's being talked about here? It's a very, very interesting one overall. And then the advice to Kyoshi from Shadow as well. Let this be my first piece of advice for you, Kyoshi. There's 1,000 generations of past lives in the Avatar cycle. You could spend 1,000 years talking to us, and you still wouldn't know how to best guide the world. This is what you must forego, Kyoshi. The easy answers. You must give up your desire for someone to tell you your choices were correct in the end. So, there we go. That is very, very clearly, and it's both written by FCE. The idea that is effectively Yang Chen explaining to Kyoshi her own kind of relationship with the past lives, is that they couldn't give her easy answers to her questions. They don't have any answers in some cases to specific questions. And in the end, you have to kind of trust yourself at a certain point. And I think that's the big thing, like, come the end of it, is that it comes back to relatively kind of simple advice in the end. Like, what Jetson tells Yang Chen to do what you can. Trust Kyoshi, Yang Chen tells Kyoshi, trust yourself that you can do what you need to do. That's fantastic, overall. So very, very interesting. So there's that. And yeah, let's get into Kavik now, the other side of our kind of main character dynamic. So, yes. So yeah, this is a character who, of course, wants the whole book to redeem himself and make amends with Yang Chen and the team. This is super clear that we know he is truly broken by what he had to do and wants to make amends with the rest of the team and kind of does everything he can to make that happen. But again, it's just he's put in this awful situation where outside of his own control in so many ways, obstacles are put in his way to kind of prevent it from being an easy, like, apology reunion with the team. You know, the whole idea of the Order of the White Lotus want him to betray Yang Chen again. They just effectively almost want to use him and his connection to Yang Chen to get the information on where Project Unanimity is, where the combustion benders are, and that's all they're really focused on. And he's willing to do this, again, because the Order of the White Lotus have said they will help him to protect his brother. And this is why the first betrayal happened, of course, is because it's this idea, it's the kind of theme in the book about decisions made or not made to protect a family member. It comes up with quite a few characters. It comes up with Kavik here, Oyaluk in the past with the Platinum Affair, and Akudan, Kavik and Kalyan themselves. Shaisi, to a certain extent, is basically kind of like defeated in the end over a decision effectively like this. And it's that whole idea of, again, the rational decision versus the emotional decision, and who made what decision. And it's interesting that it's, surprisingly, it's a lot of the heroes occasionally making some of those rational decisions, where it's the villains being defeated by making the emotional decision. Like, there's a few times in the book where characters note that, like, you betrayed us for family. Can't really blame you for that, kind of type thing. Like, it's still upsetting that the betrayal happened, but, like, you did it for a somewhat reasonable reason. But then you get into the kind of nature of all of these dynamics, and especially when we bring Kalyan into play and the whole idea of how much of this is out of a true sense of like there's a relationship there, it's truly wanting a relationship and just kind of, you are my family member, therefore I feel obligated to help you. And there's a bit of that going on, and they're kind of really they build up to the moment of Kavik kind of realizing finally that I don't really have a relationship with my brother anymore. Why do I do so much for him in the end? It's a very, very interesting whole idea here. You know, Kavik betrays Yang Chen for his brother, despite there not really being much of a relationship anymore. And again, it mostly seems to be out of a sense to kind of pay his brother back for protecting him. That's what happened in that first scene. It was basically like, I'm calling in the favor you owe me because I saved your life all those years ago. Oh, and by the way, I also technically saved your life a couple of times while you were in Jonderie. You just didn't know it. And he has to ultimately manipulate Kavik to get him to make this decision. But Kalyan, at every single turn, will protect Kavik. And it's such an interesting relationship because it's like, this is so dysfunctional, but it's what he wants more than anything is to protect his brother. And it's such an interesting one. And Kavik feels that he kind of has to do the same in return, even though the reveal kind of ends up being more that Kavik has always kind of suffered a little bit at the hands of Kalyan, always in the shadow here of Kalyan the Great. And finally, when will that actually happen? We see, in a way, like sort of some of the troubles that Yang Chen and Kavik face, the relationship between the brothers has become a little bit businesslike and transactional. The familial bond is kind of gone, ultimately. And so you get the weird moment where, again, between the brothers, the hero character is the one who makes the amazing character arc growth by basically breaking a family bond. And the villain is villainous for protecting the family bond. And that's the kind of fascinating kind of point here as we kind of get into this, and the whole idea of, you know, Kavik goes against both other parties and puts himself on the line to ultimately kind of prove himself to the team. He uses Kalyan's protection against him, but he still doesn't want him dead. It's not that level of, I'm done with you. And in a way, this is probably why they didn't have them have a fight in the end and do it that way. They were still kind of highlighting by the end that, like, Kalyan is this incredibly talented bender / assassin. He is so talented in so many regards. He probably still is more skilled, but he's gone down a different path, and that's the whole point. And this is what's so interesting as well, is that this is an interesting connection. I don't think I made this in any of my reviews, but like going through it again, it's like, you know, Kalyan's criticism of Yang Chen's relationship with Kavik is kind of accurate to what the actual Kalyan-Kavik relationship is. Like, what he says of the idea of, like, you know, you have a knife to his throat when it comes to the idea of, like, this, like, obligation he feels to you. It's just like, is that not how he feels to you, Kalyan, as well? And he doesn't get it in a way. And that's what's kind of super interesting about the whole time. Of like, yeah, the guilt-tripping aspect to it as well. And this is one that I'm really interested to see what your guys' thoughts are on. Because from the first book, I definitely kind of got the impression that the brothers had a bit of a better relationship than, in a way, this book ends up revealing. This book seems to reveal that even when they were kind of younger, there was always this sense of Kalyan using the whole idea of, I'm your big brother, I will help you, but you owe me for helping you, dynamic against him, like, at all times. That living with Kalyan was this thing that was a struggle for Kavik. I wish we had delved more into the flashback scenes, because the few that we get in, like, the first book, it seems pretty positive, but Kavik more or less tells us that actually the relationship was always strained to a certain degree. And it seems like it's because Kalyan always had these ambitions to kind of be more than just like all the other Water Tribe people and stuff like that. And it does seem to just be a case of he looked up to him because he was more skilled than him in nearly every regard, but their personal relationship was never super strong. So very interesting. And then with regards to the owl, I really like the way they do this, where he accepts the help from them, in that I think you can tell like he has a dynamic with a Unarak because they knew each other before Order of the White Lotus stuff, and so there's a bit of a personal connection there, as well as the more you would make a good Lotus basically. But at every single scene it is super clear he fundamentally disagrees with the approach of the Order of the White Lotus. He is more aligned with Yang Chen's approach, and he would rather help her to help people rather than help the Order of the White Lotus make their logical power plays. And that's what I find so interesting, is that all those moments where like Kavik is like scoffing at literally stuff that like a Unarak and Do say, and it's so like, yeah, that's exactly the way Yang Chen would react to that scene. And I think that's what's quite interesting, in that he learns quite a bit in terms of like subtle, detailed water bending from a Unarak, but he's obviously in the right spot at the end. That, yeah, the White Lotus is not the place for him. He doesn't like the archaic, symbols and codes and stuff like that, and they are a little bit too arrogant for him in this era. But I do think Kavik's as a character is fantastic. Like, I think across all the books, he is our best non-Avatar character. I think that's pretty fair to say. Now, obviously, there's some more like lesser used, but kind of maybe more interesting characters in some ways out there. But in terms of development and time, I think Kavik uses the time he gets across these two books like super well, and he's definitely one of my favorite characters. I think it's a really strong portrayal that makes me kind of wish like, oh, I wish Rangi had a little bit more page count like that. But it's really, really interesting. Now, Jujinta. So we're getting into some of the more kind of minor characters. So we're doing kind of like Team Yang Chen first, and then we'll get into some of the villains. So, Jujinta. So, we get more of him, much more in this book than we got in the first book. In that, like, we really get the sense he's kind of found himself as a member of Yang Chen's team Avatar. I think there's even a scene where he says, like, it's the most, like, fulfilling time of his life being around Yang Chen. That meeting in the first book where she is someone who can sort of forgive him to a certain extent for what he did is he's able to become someone that he maybe never thought he could become. So he is this trusted member of the team, and is the one most annoyed, most upset by Kavik's betrayal. I think in part because like he was kind of like, you know, the first of the others to kind of get like kind of close to Kavik because they were paired together as part of like the association and stuff like that. But it's cool to see the little moments where like he's going around the air temple and they're calling him like Master Jujinta, and then Kavik joins up again and he's like, wait, why is he the leader on this mission and not me? And it's just that idea of like, well, you've been like off doing different stuff for a while. During all of that time, he was a member of the team longer than you've been, and that's a bit of an interesting dynamic. And then, yeah, like you get this whole idea of like he's not this like strong speaker, but at the end he gets acknowledged for these kind of specific moments of like sage wisdom where he cuts through to the heart of the matter in a way that a lot of the other characters who are more logical with how they do things maybe wouldn't be able to get through. And I think that's kind of cool by itself as well, where like it is true that, say, Jujinta up against or involved in like the Awashi incident would have been absolutely lost at sea in that sort of a situation. But he was super important on the island when it came to kind of getting through to the kids, Xian and Raite. Which obviously ends up being the main sort of core reveal about Zhu Jinta's past, is just the comparisons that he sees to what they went through. And it's a bit of a vague way to do it. But, you can see the idea there. Now, this is where we get into probably our first truly kind of frustrating part of the book, and that is that we literally have a scene in a chapter where Kavik and Yang Chen basically say, tell us your backstory. And Zhu Jinta is like, no. And it's just like, come on. Because what they say ultimately is pretty much just that, I guess, the Yuyan clan is a clan that is ultimately behind the scenes one that cares a lot about that skill of archery, accuracy, and the idea of a Yuyan never misses, and it kind of being true, and there being sort of almost a spiritual, artful element to that, where it's not just a kind of like, they're very skilled archers most of the time and they don't miss, but like truly you don't miss if you do it right type thing. And obviously we now learn, I suppose, the idea is that kind of like the unanimity training stuff, it is a bit more of a kind of torturous style training where there's punishments, they're put into competition against each other. If you are bottom of the pile, you are left out, excluded, or worse, and you have to succeed to survive. But ultimately, they don't give you any actual details on this. Like, I think it's kind of crazy. The word Yuyan is not once mentioned in the Legacy of Yangchen. It just comes up that one time in Dawn of Yangchen, to the point where I'm left wondering, like, why did you even mention it in the first book if you, at a core level, didn't really have too much to say about it? Because it's very clear that the whole idea is that he committed this crime to the Yuyan, which is that he killed his brother. We're not really told the exact specifics about it, but it seems to be the idea that, I guess, this clan, which is maybe ultimately used your skills in an artful way, maybe he used his skills and in some way did or accidentally killed his brother, and because of that he was exiled. Like, what's going on there? Like, there is the RPG information with Izuku Yuyan in the Roku era, which more or less it doesn't even like go against this or anything like that. It just highlights that, I guess, a Yuyan clan member at that point in the Roku era is basically how we get from it being this kind of secretive clan on a fire island to it being a wing of the Fire Nation military having Yuyan archers. And there's just a severe, I think, just lack of commitment, and just for some reason them deciding that this was enough with this character, because they just don't kind of come back to him here, and it's just like, it feels like there was meant to be like another scene, but then we just don't get it in the end. Like, you're still left wondering, like, what situation led to him killing his brother? Especially when we basically were effectively told almost that it seemed like they were almost killing each other in the training. So how was him somehow killing his brother like this exilable offense for him? That's the really, I think, kind of confusing thing about this, is that it feels like there needs to be more, and it doesn't make sense why they left it like this. But unfortunately, it feels like that is most of kind of what there is to say about this. But yeah, then we go to the husband pair here. This is Taegum and Akudan, who they are obviously the least used members of the team. But I think there is a good enough use of them throughout the book where I feel like you can't really say that they get the Kirima and Wong treatment. I think they give them some really big. The oil look kind of cousin reveal is actually quite a notable one, and then they get some hype moments overall. I think so. Like, of course, like Jujinta, they get the whole idea of their thoughts on Kavik's betrayal, the impact that they had to leave their home in Jondari because, effectively, of what happened. Like I said, the Akudan thing with Oiluk, basically, again, this whole idea of the rational choice over the family or emotional choice. Oiluk chose kind of protecting the nation over protecting his cousin, and is broken in a way by that decision. And you can see multiple times where Akudan has those moments of like, oh, I wish my cousin had made like the same choice that you made. And there is those kind of regrets over it and stuff like that. It's very interesting. And then if there was a little bit more time for them, I think it probably would just be like a quick chapter where we show them on Iwashi's boat doing what they do. Just getting to see a little bit of them as sort of like agents, effectively, doing their stealth mission. I, to a certain extent, understand why they did it in that sequence where you're kind of waiting the whole time for the signal from this mission to end the tension, effectively, of the gambling scene. It could have been a bit awkward if you showed every single iteration. But I think it would have been a nice little moment to maybe show them in action. But it's probably best that they kept the true reveal of their skill for this final moment, because it is a huge moment. Like, it can't be understated here. Kalyan is basically presented as being kind of this near undefeatable kind of bender. Like, he's just able to dodge everything going on in the middle of this kind of chaotic battle out in the street. He's got these assassin skills. He's like incredibly powerful waterbender, and while we maybe don't get to see too much of that, they definitely hype up how skilled he is. And the idea is that if these two weren't like extremely powerful benders and sort of combatants, they would have been killed by Kalyan's response to kind of coming into contact with them. So we obviously get the kind of, in a way, surprise reveal here. Akudan is also a waterbender. And the whole water, like the whole ice shield thing, and then they actually win the fight by effectively removing water from the situation. That's what's so clever with Taegum's approach in the fight, of like, Kalyan fires this water at him, but Taegum's just like, yeah, that water's gone, I'll take you hand to hand. And that's just like such a confident reveal, and they just kind of completely, take him out. And the reveal that, like, I think they'd said it before in the book, that like Kavik was like, oh, you two were just like quartermasters, you basically just like guarded some like supply shipments. But then the true reveal being that, like, wait, no, they were the guards for like the most important delivery of the era. They are the most powerful close combatants that like we had in the Water Tribe. That's actually a really kind of clever reveal. And then, yeah, strong acting, showing their like experience in the field, that, the other characters are the errand runners, but wait, they're experienced operatives as well. That's a really strong one here. So, big improvement, I think, with the sort of like extra members of the team here, I think, over the Kyoshi books, in terms of the development that they get there. And then I suppose we have to include Yingsu here, overall, as a pseudo member of the team, because they basically allude to that right at the end. Like, Kavik's like, is she joining up? And Yang Chen's like, maybe. And it seems like she likes this. She seems loyal to Yang Chen and kind of wants to help out. There's probably some complexities around the whole idea of, even if she doesn't use her combustion bending, like, would people know who she is, what she is, how many people are familiar very, very specifically with this character is a combustion bender? So how many missions can she be used on? Or will she always just be background support on specific situations? I suppose is kind of the idea. But this is, again, good plotting. Like, this is set up in the first book with the idea that Yingsu was the final combustion bender that Yang Chen took down. She didn't use the suck air out of the room technique to take her down. Instead, this is who Jujinta shot with the arrow, which is another reason why I really wish we had gotten a scene where the full Team Yang Chen was talking, because I would have loved that to have been brought up. Just like Kavik or someone being like, oh yeah, Yingsu, you know he was the one who shot you with the arrow. And Jujinta's just like, that would have been like a great kind of fun scene to have with like the other characters interacting with her. Because it's really fun to see her kind of like banter with Yang Chen, because she's very kind of comfortable talking to her. So what would the others be like with her? That's the kind of cool thing. And yeah, just her making that decision, kind of unlike Thapa, that, do you know what? Me holding my loyalty to, you know, the people who helped me develop my technique has done nothing for me. I'm going to put in my lot with you and just tell you everything you want to know, and trust that you will get me out of this and you will have my loyalty because of that. I really like that she was just the character who basically made that choice of like, do you know what? I'll try and protect these airbenders here, help the Avatar, and hopefully that'll work out well for me. And the fake death is a really strong fake out moment. This book has a little bit of a kind of, you would say, structure kind of problem, where it tries to do the story told out of order fake out a couple of times. This is where it like 100% works. There are other moments where it works as well, but there are other moments where it just feels like, come on, just tell the story in the right way. But the Yingsu one is just like, you can't see that coming at all in any way. And yeah, the whole idea of like, you know, yeah, I would love to see, you know, how this actually ends up working, because obviously she and Yang Chen are going to have this like ongoing relationship, because of course Yang Chen is going to have to keep track of the last combustion bender in the world, because like this point is super valid as well. She seems to be how combustion bending survives into the future. Is she going to be the one who like develops the idea of the combustion bending tattoo? If she has like a family of her own, does her legacy go on to basically mean that she is related to Combustion Man and or Pali? That would be kind of interesting, because I almost get the impression like, is there meant to be a whole like Yingsu Pali kind of like connection here somehow? But again, this is where I would love to know a little bit more about you know, combustion bending overall, and how exactly this all kind of works and so on. But the use of Yingsu at the end, in a way, like Yang Chen's asset, Yang Chen's friend, the combustion bender, this counters Thapa, because of course she did the training with Yang Chen. This is how Yang Chen was able to defeat a combustion bender in a like fight directly around each other. And it also stops Fei Shan from seeking vengeance, as well as it basically getting her the position of Zongdu. So it's a really cool kind of solution to all of this stuff in the end. But yeah, the question still remains of like, this book didn't overly attempt to go into a technical detail on combustion bending and the details of how it works. So you would assume Yingsu has to be how that happens, because the combustion benders as we go forward are better than Yingsu. Yingsu is the quickest of the combustion benders, but she still is implied to have to take like quite a few breaths between every attack, whereas Combustion Man and Pali can just like really quickly do kind of one breath attack. They don't need the giant build up that these kind of early combustion benders need. And is it as simple as the tattoo or what? But the idea seems to be that Yingsu, at the very least, becomes the first combustion bender who probably lives a long enough life with her technique to progress it to a point where like, this is the more efficient way to use the technique. So I wonder what the whole idea is there. Like, does Ying Su eventually like settle down on the island where the whole Pali warlord situation happens, referencing Korra? Who knows? There's a lot of like mysterious Fire Island stuff going on here, because like Unanimity is on Chaise's unnamed island. The Yuyan is also unnamed sort of Fire Island somewhere, and now there's this kind of bunch of other places. It just keeps popping up basically. Then we get into the Order of the White Lotus, which is a very interesting one. It's one of those ones where, like, if from ATLA you're someone who really loves the Order of the White Lotus, you probably had a little bit of a tough time reading them in the Yang Chen books, because it's like, it's kind of night and day a little bit in terms of the reveal and the approach with all of them. Okay. So yeah, we have a third, fourth group, I guess, if you add in like Fei Shan, the world leaders, but for the most part, it is mainly the idea of it's like Chai-Si and Kalyan is one group, Yang Chen is one, and it's the Order of the White Lotus. That's the kind of three-way kind of dance we have going on with all this information. And yes, from the first book we know their approach is opposite of Yang Chen's. Yang Chen seeks to prevent issues from happening in the first place, while the Order of the White Lotus will wait for the right moment to act. So the quote again is like, what? Better to parry the sword than heal the wound. Whereas the Owl, of course, are like, no, we'll see what the wound is and then make our decision from there. And it's like, okay, I get it, they sit and wait, but in this case, there is also a thing of they're being quite meddlesome in the era as well. Because I should probably bring up this stuff as well. Very early on in this book, we get the reveal that the Order of the White Lotus is the one responsible at like a core level for the Platinum Affair. With the idea that Oiluk and Gonryu just went with basically what their assistants said. They came up with this idea, told the leaders, like, what about this? What if you support Nong and make this all happen? And they were just like, why not? And the idea that like it happened over a game of Pai Sho is just like the era was defined by a couple of games of Pai Sho and just suggestions made over those games. That's the kind of big idea. Not to mention the whole tension with Fei Shan going into the end of the book is also basically revealed to be the Order of the White Lotus's fault. That their structure means that they have like benefits because they're so almost detached from each other, but then there's also the possibility of leaking as well, because the loyalty is more of just like, trusting that everyone is fully into the whole idea of it being this group of people from all the different nations, that they are better than a specific kind of group from a specific nation. They're better than the nations because they, incorporate everything. But there is also the case of like, you don't know all of these people and what they've done. There are people who are hidden in a spot for like 10 years without ever having contact. The trust that there has to be to, hope that all that stuff actually works is so interesting. But it is also the case that I suppose it is effectively what was going on in the ATLA era as well, that we hype them up because we like those characters so much, whereas we can see the kind of flawed presentation of like a Unarak and what she says, and the flaws within the likes of Do. But we're like, Iroh, but then you realize, Iroh's made mistakes as well, and like when he eventually like joined the Order of the White Lotus, this and that, you remember like Palku's a member of the group, but like he was also the one who was just like, Katara, I'm not training you because you're a girl, because of like the Northern Water Tribe, this is how we are. And it's like, you kind of realize, even looking back at the original one, our original group of masters, like it wasn't all perfect in a way, because of course they waited for the ideal moment to strike, and it of course worked out well. But what more was actually happening? What were they doing during the war and all this sort of stuff? And of course, like, we know that some of them were kind of helping more than others. That, like, Omashu within the war, so like Bumi was ultimately kind of helping distribute weapons around, and that's kind of one way to kind of do things, and that's a bit of an interesting one. But then specifically, we know the Northern Water Tribe were more or less isolated and stayed away, using their kind of natural defenses and all this sort of stuff. It's very interesting to kind of think about it, because it definitely makes you go from being like, the Order of the White Lotus is like this thing that's like the top tier group, everyone as part of that is like perfect, amazing, and is more like, no, it is this flawed group that at a core level have like a good ideal, and if sort of controlled by these perfect right people, is the right thing to do. But as we sort of see, they are quite arrogant in this era, talking about how they're the best players of the game. But a lot of people disagree with them. Yang Chen disagrees, Kavik disagrees, but I do like the mention that Kavik kind of notes in the end that, like, even though there's a fundamental disagreement, they are technically some of the only kind of like true allies that kind of Yang Chen kind of has, because there's no other group in a way in the world trying to do similar things to the Avatar, and that's where the Order of White Lotus kind of come into play to a certain extent. And I think you can tell that maybe in the Kyoshi era they took a little bit of a step back, stopped trying to be so kind of meddlesome, and just more assisted the Avatar, learned what the Avatar was doing, but they just were like, Jimpa, help her out. and that's kind of what happened. It didn't obviously seem like there was a particular problem going on. But as we go into the Korra era, of course, they come out into the open. They directly help the Avatar, which seems like a good thing. But it kind of seems like in the process, they kind of lost a little bit of like what made the organization kind of interesting. Now, obviously, to be fair, most of the White Lotus members we see are kind of just the grunts, which are effectively your equivalent to the people who die in the battle on the streets. That's kind of the way I would phrase it, where they are skilled benders, but they are not the masters. That's what happens when the association goes up against the White Lotus. It's the same as the White Lotus members they have guarding Air Temple Island. That's the way kind of I view it. And it's certainly like an interesting one. Like, Do at least gets that little bit of a kind of redemption style moment where in the end he kind of realized they probably made the wrong choice here, trying to go behind everyone's back and do what they did. Last ditch, saves kind of Kavik, gives him a chance to get away. Nice enough moment. And even though like you kind of hate him at the start, he has that kind of moment where you think he's going to kind of stab the knife in a little bit more about like Yang Chen now dealing with the loss of Nugent, but he's kind of like, in a way that kind of highlights the other side of the problem of like a one person can only deal with so much grief. And in a way that's something that doesn't affect the Order of the White Lotus, because we are sort of detached from everyone, and there isn't a loss that would destroy the entire Order of the White Lotus. And it's a bit of an interesting point. But that's that. But there, I think there is the need now for a little bit of a redemption of the Order of the White Lotus. I'd like to see the exploration of an era where they're maybe really good, or maybe even just kind of some of the stuff where we highlight more of what was going on with the ATLA White Lotus members. But I'd like to know some more about the group at their core, and what are their really, really strong moments overall. But yeah, in the end of this era, they end up with basically very little of the information. But Ayunarak sort of accepts her defeat here in the best way she sort of can. But we'll see what happens as we go forward here. And that brings us into the villains here. Chai-Si. So, in my mind, like, the opening chapter of the book is incredible. I think it's a really, really strong chapter where, like, they do a lot with that page count. You get the interesting backstory. You tell us a little bit about the island and what was going on there. You give the kind of inciting event to explain sort of why she is the way she is in the present day. Basically, the idea of she will not let what happened to her and her island happen to her ever again. She will never be that helpless for basically the rulers of the world to just legally take everything away from her because, a piece of paper was signed when no one on the island ever said anything about it. That's the interesting kind of aspect of it, where we get that kind of complete backstory here of just these people on this island who they have one thing that they do. They get the stuff from the bottom of the ocean, and that's what they sell. That's how they survive. And just a piece of paper is signed in this weird agreement between two of the nations, and suddenly someone randomly owns everything at the bottom of the ocean surrounding this island that no one involved in this whole process has ever cared about the whole time through. That's really, really interesting. They obviously skim through like the core of her backstory like quite quickly about this is how she developed a lot of her political skills and kind of became a Zongdu and stuff like that. It definitely, I think, sets the stage that like you are going... I felt, certainly after reading like the preview chapter, that we were going to get more like this, where we'd go a specific incident and cover it a little bit more. We do get the reveal on the island that her plan was not solely focused on combustion bending, but they'd also include the idea of chi blockers as part of her sort of personal security, the idea of potentially lava bending, because there's that very interesting line about the earthbenders they brought to the island being led off into the volcanic interior and like never coming back. Also kind of mysterious, the herbalist stuff that some of the non-benders were doing. I thought that it was probably going to be something related to like poison, assassins, but I don't actually know. And then of course the brainwashing as well. Like it's an almost a weird reveal that it's just like you go into the book thinking combustion bending, combustion bending, combustion bending, but then the kind of reveals that you get are actually that like, oh yeah, she was doing a little bit of everything. But the problem, and I think this is the problem with this stuff, is that we never learn how she learned about any of this stuff, which I can be okay with when it comes to like, say, chi blocking, because I don't think chi blocking is meant to be particularly like secretive necessarily. It feels like a ability that is figure outable and that will pop up at different places in the world as different kind of cultures find out about it. Fine. The herbalist stuff I don't really have a problem with. Even the brainwashing stuff to a certain extent, I don't really have an issue with. This book is not meant to be the origin of brainwashing, because it's clear that it obviously sort of maybe has existed before this, and this is just Chai-Si using it. The combustion bending and the lack of explanation, I think, is a real problem, because they're highlighting that this is the debut within the Avatar universe, effectively, of combustion bending. And the fact that they just deem it okay to just be like, yeah, she knew what to do. Because that's the thing in all of this, is like, why does she ever, in the first place, put a fire? Like, there's your true question right there. How does anyone think to do this? Like, the setup from the first chapter is the people on her island pressurized themselves, often died. It was fatal occasionally. They never put in the middle piece overall. There's the obvious initial setup Then there's combustion benders underwater. That middle piece of information is just non-existent. And nothing in the book hints to why this is a thing that they do, know to do, or anything like that. And the thing is, like, what they ultimately go for is the idea that this idea, they play with this, I think, quite heavily with this, because this is the whole, I think, idea of the lava benders, of like, if you put them at risk in the middle of a volcano of being hit by lava magma, they can potentially unlock the ability. That's basically what happened to Bolin. But again, even if you don't have a very specific encounter of Chai-Si with combustion bending in the first place, you also don't have her ever learning about the idea that, oh yeah, she witnessed a bender unlock a special ability in a crazy heat of the moment situation. Like, they just don't ever come around to that idea in the first place. And the ultimate answer in the book that they give you is sort of that, like, is like this. It's like Chai-Si reads books, and you're meant to really heavily read into the idea of, like, she has these rare scrolls, so that's how she knows about chi blocking. She reads the book about, like, chi paths that she has, and circles, so this is how she knows about brainwashing. And it's like, come on, it's an entire project that is implied that Zhongdu Dushim was also involved with to a certain degree. I really don't get it, because I think the big thing as well is that, say, like, the brainwashing, we have the weirdness of the whole chapter, and I've brought this up a few times. How oddly vague that moment in that chapter is, and they're like, there's all these metal hoops on the ground in this dark cave in this room, and they're all different sizes, and they're lined up like this. Then they uncovered the chair in the middle of the room, and they're like, Kavik came to a conclusion about what he saw, and he nearly got sick. Jujinta nearly did the same thing. Yang Chen walks out and just buries the place underground. And you're like, the whole time through, like, care to tell me what you think you saw or not? Because the brainwashing is kind of weird as well. The whole idea of this is, like, I just gotta say here, I think that the ultimate conclusion that I come to at the book is that you didn't need the brainwashing, like, at all. Like, it basically does not play an important role in the book at all. Because if you literally replace that scene with the idea of just, like, literally it was just a torture chamber. It was just really obvious that people were tortured in there and killed in there. And you weren't even alluding to the whole mechanism of what was going on there. It's referenced in, like, 3 or 4 scenes. That's it in the entire book. It's the initial scene with Thapa, then the actual kind of hoops and stuff like that in the room. Then there's once or twice they mention the idea of, like, Yang Chen looks at Thapa and sees, like, a glazed look on his face. And then the book ends, and no one ever acknowledges brainwashing being a thing. And so this is where the vagueness surrounding the scene is kind of like, did they just interpret it as bad stuff happened in this room, or did any of them know specifically that it's brainwashing? Because I think some of the scenes work differently depending on, like, what the actual intent is. But my takeaway is that by the end of the book, no one is aware that brainwashing happened in the book except Chai-Si and Kalyan, basically. And this is where even the scenes with Ying Su, I'm really stunned that they didn't mention stuff like this. Like, because in a way, this is a weird kind of almost like plot hole of like, yes, they said Ying Su, the brainwashing maybe isn't as strong on her, but they still imply that it worked on her. So the idea is weird that like Chai Si could technically take control of Ying Su if she ever actually, came into contact with her again. So that's a kind of like almost like open plot thread here, that like there's an edge that Chai Si has over Yang Chen. But then the ending of the book seems to imply that Chai Si is just going to be completely open with Yang Chen going forward. So it's basically this weird off-screen reveal that it happened. I just think it's a weird one where I think they hid the fact that they didn't have many reveals about this by kind of alluding to the whole idea of like, oh, look at all these other things that she was actually doing. Because even the combustion bending training and like, in a way, like the reveal that they kind of had to do from the first book of like Thoppa mentioning a bunch of people drowned trying to learn this ability. And then the reveal is kind of, in a way, the most obvious thing imaginable, which is that like, oh yeah, they did just put the firebenders underwater and kind of have them firebend in a way that wasn't just to try and produce a flame. And again, they link into the idea of this to unlock a special power, and that's the first stage of the training. But then they tease you with the idea that, but then there are conditions required for the next phase of training, that you need to be big, you need to have the lung capacity. But then you're kind of like, wait, I thought the first one is where you need the lung capacity, but Raite clearly passed that himself, but he's not enough to go on to the next stage of the training, and they're just kind of vague about kind of what exactly happened next. But again, I still maintain this is like a pretty high level oversight that this never gets addressed in the book, and is kind of implied that it could happen in the future in one of these meetings that Yang Chen and Chai Si have going forward. So yeah, it's a massive plot hole. I do wonder, like, is this the case? Like, are there cut Chai Si chapters in this book? Because the strength of that first chapter, and then I like the way they actually go about kind of using her. I like the scene of the reveal of, like, her basically, like, this is how I want to use you, Yang Chen, to get what I want. Yang Chen's reversal is a really good scene. But that shouldn't have been Chai Si's final scene in the book. I really, really think there should have been some sort of a very end of the book scene with Chai Si. So let's get into this. Her overall goal is revealed to be like kind of surprisingly reasonable. Like the chapter where she asks Yang Chen to support her, it's like, if not for the kind of the things that Chai Si has allowed to happen on the island, you're kind of like, this doesn't seem too bad in a way, but you can't let her get away with this, basically. So it's not world conquest or even control of the whole Shang system. It's just she wants her position to become like permanent and then hereditary, so it will be passed on to her son. And then she's going to use, her trained army of benders and fighters, chi blockers, to protect that legacy. And then the idea is like she, overall her plan was to, use Thoppa to take out the three world leaders. And I suppose she would be one of the more stable leaders with the loss of all of those world leaders. And so she would probably be given the position anyway just because of that. Or what actually happens in the book is that she tries to use the threat of this assassination to get Yang Chen's support and get it just by like mutual kind of agreement. And it's a very clever ploy because it's like, it's so much more intelligently planned out than what Hansha did with the combustion benders. And they make that point like so many times of like, he just saw benders with a really powerful ability. Let's use them in effectively almost direct combat against other people, when the skill is actually best used, as like an assassination technique. So that's really, really interesting. But again, she's basically defeated because she has this goal of wanting to have a legacy. That if she didn't have a family, Yang Chen's threat kind of maybe might not have worked as much. Chai-Si might have been okay to be like, okay, I'll go down with you, Avatar, and sort of stuff like that. But it's just that idea again of like the emotional choice, the rational choice, and because she now has a child, she makes the choice to, you know, protect her legacy. And yeah, we see that happen. Like, yeah, both the father of her child giving up a key piece of information to protect his brother, and then her basically giving up in front of Yang Chen out of fear of what would happen to her son if she was to die here. It is the perfect way to defeat Chai-Si. Because especially the specifics in how they do it, where it's Yang Chen like laughing at the whole idea of like, oh yeah, and then all the people who are super loyal to you, who you like pay to work for you, are surely going to look after your son, aren't they? And immediately Chai-Si is just like, okay, you've beaten me. Like, I give up. It is the perfect kind of solution to that, because it's like, at this point, after everything she's done, what is she without her legacy? She needs this above all else. And it works for the character, and it's a great scene. So yeah, we see the dynamic at the end of the book. She's now on the run from Feishan. Kalyan's with her son is with her. Yang Chen's going to use her as an asset, and this keeps her biggest threats out of the way and allows her to act to kind of actually help the world. With the implication that, I suppose, if Feishan ever gets close to them, it seems like they're suggesting Yang Chen would step in to protect them, mainly out of the efforts to protect the son, of course. But then we get into this one. I'm super interested to see what you guys in the chat have to say about this. I just want some general thoughts on Chai-Si's relationship with Kalyan, given everything presented here, and what happens in this book, the themes that they kind of explore, and the betrayal and stuff like that. It's a little bit weird in some of this stuff. I think on the Chai-Si side of things, I think you kind of understand it. Like, for a character who has always wanted a legacy, the idea of her having family, I think, is important to her. And then I think it makes sense why she would, have a relationship with someone who is themselves quite powerful, can defend themselves, can defend the family as well. And Kalyan fits the bill, where he was basically undefeatable, except for a very, very specific situation happening, of course. So she clearly cares, loves him. This is why she obviously had the child with him. And then she did forgive the betrayal that happened while she was pregnant. And I think that's the most interesting thing about this, is like this, the whole Hansha thing of like him giving unanimity away happened while she was pregnant. So quite a bit into their relationship, depending on what exactly the situation was. And you kind of wonder, like, because from some of his dialogue, you definitely get the sense that like he views it as like they actually have like a relationship. Like he is loyal to her. He even says it like, in a way like, was it the Zongdu of Chai-Si's man, like through and through. So he's fully invested in this. And again, jumping into Kalyan, because it's the same dynamic here. Of course, he assassinates Hansha, his former friend. So he betrays, his former employer for his newer employer, after initially actually betraying said new employer. But still, this was a true betrayal of Chai-Si, because in chapter 1, Chai-Si does note that she was left a little bit helpless, without unanimity, and she basically had to use Kalyan to start the whole incident at the Northern Air Temple to actually get unanimity back under her control. So he created this situation and then solved the same situation. And like is mentioned, I think exactly like Kalyan says in the book, well, I think basically the only reason I was truly forgiven was because I am the father of the child, and that they actually do have some sort of an actual relationship there, because it seems so unlike her otherwise that she would actually do that, especially over something as important as unanimity. So I think there is a sense of she cares about Kalyan as well, and then this is why in the end they place that entire family unit together. Whether or not it works as an actual kind of dynamic, we don't actually know, especially depending on like how everyone reacts to reveals happening and stuff like that. It's a bit of a weird one. But at least for Kalyan, we do learn about kind of what his sort of like dream is, like what he ultimately wants to accomplish, which is that he wants to have this kind of perfect family living in peace and safety together. And that includes both, you know, his sort of new family, him, Chai-Si, his son, but also he wants to bring his parents and Kavik with him there and just have everyone he is close to protected. And it very much feels like he is bought into kind of what Chai-Si wants, and that is true safety from everything, where like they are legally the people in power on Jonderie, and so that can't be reversed. But then if someone does go against them, they have their quote-unquote army of special benders and chi blockers to defend themselves, and it's the most secure possible situation to live together with the people you care about. And it is an interesting one because it's clear that like Kalyan is this very ambitious character, and clearly this family dynamic is something he really wants. But then you get like the dynamic of like he wants to bring Kavik with him, but just is blind to what their relationship actually is these days. Like he doesn't treat Kavik well outside of protecting him at so many times. And this is obviously the manipulation, the physical threats and stuff like that comes in. It's just an interesting one. And this is obviously how he's defeated, is by using this care for his brother against him. Again, I'll make this point again of like what he says about Yang Chen basically applies to his own relationship with Kavik. That like, yeah, that's that relationship. It's become transactional. They're both forever just protecting the other because they have each protected each other in the past, and that's everything that it is. And then yeah, Kalyan Chai-Si left unexplored. So he cares, and is in the end like loyal to her in that, like, I wouldn't say like him giving up the information because of what's happening to Kavik is a direct betrayal of Chai-Si, and that, like, I think that's understandable. It's the Hansha thing is like very much like I don't really know how to explain that, and that's where we really needed to see that scene. Like, I don't think it's good enough that we just got the idea of like he tells Kavik that like, oh yeah, I came clean to her already, she forgave me because I'm the father of her son. Like, how did that happen? Like, what did they say? And this is where it really suffers from the idea of like like, this is the big problem here. These two never have a scene together, even though they're in a relationship. They have a child together, and this is probably just a factor of it being a YA book, where like they're fine with giving like the main villain a little bit of a, you know, solo focus, but they're not giving you Kalyan scenes, and then they're not giving you Chai-Si and Kalyan scenes, because this relationship isn't a YA relationship. This is an adult relationship, and it's just a little bit like, oh, come on. You have to cover this one, I think, just to see what their dynamic actually is, because she clearly trusts him, because the whole idea is, like, again, relating to Kalyan's backstory, he rose through the ranks, like Chai-Si's ranks, super quickly. So she obviously saw something in him from like an early point, and I'm interested to see how exactly that went. in terms of like, you know, who initiated this relationship, and then what is it at this point ultimately. But in a way, and this is where like it is unfortunate that we don't get a final scene, because by the end, Kalyan kind of has what he wanted in a certain way, where like he's with his family. In a way, a lot of the complicated stuff is out of the way. The whole errand running stuff. He has his family. His mission in life now is effectively like to protect Chai-Si and his son, and just evade basically. He has the simple life he wanted. It's just maybe not as kind of peaceful as he actually wanted. But, you know, they're going to be on the run, but he is with the family the whole time. And you in a way wonder, if things had gone the way Chai-Si had planned, would they all be together? Because we don't know the nature of their relationship, whereas the situation at the end of the book has kind of forced them to be together as a family unit. So I don't know. It's an interesting one, but it is an interesting note from Kavik that like he feels this will kind of be better for Kalyan, because at least he'll kind of be alive, because he felt that the kind of errand running side of things was going to get him killed one day. So that's an interesting one. But yeah, it's the absolute truth, I think, with the book, is that how they never come back around to this is weird. Like, this should not have been off-screened, in my mind. Like, I think you needed to have the scene where, like, Yang Chen kind of lets Chai-Si, Kalyan, and her son get away. And just establish what this dynamic truly is. Because there's also, I suppose, going back to Chai-Si for a little bit, because of the reveal that Kalyan had actually told Chai-Si about, like, himself and his brother earlier on, it means that, like, during a lot of the scenes where Master Liu is meant to be basically undercover, Kavik's undercover, that means that Chai-Si actually knows it's Kavik the entire time. And there's that one interesting scene where Chai-Si talks to Yang Chen. I think it's after they beat Iwashi, and she's just kind of like, you know, you have a like interesting partner there. Make sure to sort of like care about them or like respect them or something like that. Like, you know, I can't remember the exact wording. She says something along those lines to Yang Chen, basically about the idea of like, you have found yourself like a very interesting kind of partner. And in a way, she almost kind of alludes to the idea of like, you know, just like I have, like, we both chose a member of the same family type thing almost. You know, is that what she was getting at in that scene? I'm not really sure. So that's a bit of an interesting one. But yeah, that is the kind of end of things. I suppose, does anyone have any final talking points, like elements of the book? Are there more minor characters that I don't have listed here that you want to see some discussion on? Because I'm struggling to remember what other stuff I might need to mention. But yeah, we're in no rush here, so we could take our time to kind of cover the last kind of bits and pieces, of course. Let's see, what do we have here? Should I see? Oh yeah, that is an interesting one, actually. Yeah, the Owl Western Air Temple Spy from the first book. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Like, it's obviously one of those ones where she doesn't like the Ordered White Lotus. She has this kind of sense of betrayal, but she still sends Xian to live here. which by itself is actually an interesting thing, because I think we skipped over Raite a little bit, but obviously Raite is killed, but Xian, the chi blocker girl, is sent to the Western Air Temple, I think roughly setting up a little bit of the history of the air nomads with chi blocking, and like Sister Ryoshan and stuff like that from the Roku era stuff. But obviously the idea is, like, we don't know every Order of the White Lotus member. The answer to this is obviously just a random none. That the speculation from the first book was that, like, what if it was one of the people really close to Yang Chen, and that would be this like soul destroying moment for Yang Chen if it was Jetson, if it was like Dagmola or someone like that. But I do get the impression it was probably just like a random character that Yang Chen might have roughly known, but it wasn't one of her kind of family kind of unit little kind of group that we kind of saw in the first book. So it's certainly an interesting one, because they obviously established that she doesn't feel maybe comfortable enough to do some of her super secret spy stuff involving the Western Air Temple, because she knows there probably maybe still is that Order of the White Lotus spy there. But I don't know. It's an interesting one. Okay, I suppose, yeah, that's an interesting one. The Saowan clan reference. So this is one where like Chai-Si just randomly slips in the idea that it's not that the Saowan clan are breaking the negotiation with the spirits, but they're kind of going against the spirit of what Yang Chen wanted them to do. That Yang Chen feels that they are almost like laughing at her in a way, because they found like a technical way to try and build themselves up again, when the intent of the deal is for them to remain kind of low down for a couple of generations. Now, they just established that they're like fortifying themselves, they're building themselves up in the only way they really can, and that is by like, this is our island, let's go full kind of like defense mode, so that basically when we are able to act a little bit again, we will be like strong and solid. And it's obviously meant to be a setup for kind of the Kyoshi era stuff, where like the Saowan clan at that point is on the rise again, and it's capable of doing what it's doing in a way because they kind of solidified themselves when dealing with kind of what happened here. It's a nice little reference. It's obviously one of those ones where it really highlights this is, I suppose, Yang Chen being incredibly annoyed at what they've done, because it's for her, it's like a defining moment in like, they just won't help themselves. They can't just accept that I've made the deal for them and just stick to it exactly the way it is. They still want to try and skirt around it, and even though they haven't broken it yet, the idea is that I think she feels eventually it'll slip through, which eventually is what happens. And this seems to be the idea with a lot of Yang Chen's deals, is that stuff like that is what will go on to happen with most of them, where a generation, maybe 2 generations of people follow it to a T, but it's very difficult to keep some of that stuff up across multiple generations, because you can never guarantee that like 60, 100 years from now, that same group of people will know what like about this thing that was agreed to like 60 years ago, which is the whole kind of plot of the Rift, where because of the air nomad genocide, there's no air nomads in the world to actually keep that land where Tianhaishi was, blank, and so people build on it because they don't know the history from the Yangchen era. There's nothing that indicates they can't just build on this plot of land, and so they just do it. And it's just that idea of what is the kind of solution there, and Yangchen blames herself for that stuff. Lore question, map question. Do you think the Orca Islands are in the north or the south? I'm guessing it's north, because Kavik mentions about like Akudan, like this is in the first book before we get the reveal, that like one of the chief's what did I say? One of the chief's cousins was born without an arm and was a kind of noted like whale hunter, and then Orca is related to whales. I don't know the exact kind of terminology stuff there, so I'm guessing that's the whole idea, because like they're northern water tribe. That's the whole intent there. But that would be my guess. But I don't know if we directly know, because I think it's just randomly mentioned that it's the Orca Islands. What do you think the purpose of FCE creating some romantic tension between Kavik and Yang Chen? I mentioned this earlier on, but like again, the Yang Chen Kavik relationship, there are little moments where I suppose you can interpret it as romantic, in that like in the first book, like there's moments where like I think Yang Chen notes that like Kavik is handsome. There are moments I think where Kavik notes Yang Chen is attractive, but ultimately throughout the entire book, I just don't think the characters are ever have enough time to start a relationship. Now, that doesn't rule out the idea that they could ever do it, and so my idea is just that, like, in the future, if Yang Chen isn't so busy, I think we can maybe get to a point that that is maybe a relationship that Yang Chen has, and it's most likely a romantic relationship with Kavik, but they don't have to do that. But I think the sort of foundational setup is there if they want to go in that direction. That's kind of my thoughts on that. Oh, yeah, actually, we probably should mention this. Yang Chen's sort of like sudden void technique. This is a very cool technique. It is extraordinarily powerful. Like that's the big takeaway here, is that Yang Chen is like suddenly right up there, top of the list in terms of like when you're doing those kind of fantasy battles. This feels like an incredibly overpowered technique in the way that it works, that you can seemingly just catch someone in one of these voids and they basically have like an instant like compression, like compression decompression style injury, like what happened to Ming Yer. Yes, it seems like Yang Chen can only use it maybe 2-3 times in a row, but this seems like, because obviously the idea is this, like this is like so like there's kind of in a way nothing better than that. Like, you know, it's an advanced form of a technique that's already like a forbidden one, that airbenders I suppose aren't really meant to do techniques like even Yang Chen did, like soaking the air kind of more slowly out of a room and making people kind of faint. But the idea that you do that like instantaneously, and you do this kind of like opposite of combustion bending style thing to kind of pressure them that way, it's very clever. And it obviously is like a kind of cool thematic thing that like she's read Shouken and Lahima, and here she is doing these kind of techniques kind of that are void based. It's an interesting one. Because obviously she does explain it is still at its core just airbending, because it's more just, you know, pushing air away from a specific area to create an absence of air, and that there is a pressure to doing that. So it's just a slightly more technical technique than you usually associate with airbending, but still very much airbending overall. What was my reaction to Nujian's death the first time I read it? Basically, it was kind of just like there with the book, and then it's just like Nujian gets hit, and I'm like, what's going to happen here? Like, does someone save the day? Because in no way are you thinking that they're going to kill the Sky Bison, and then they just commit to it. And it was honestly a moment reading the book where I just kind of like, bookmark in, closed the book, and it was just like, whoa, I just can't believe they did that. And it was just that moment of just like, you sit there in silence and you're like, that is actually like harder hitting than like if they killed off quite a few different characters in the book. Like it really kind of affects you. And I think most people probably have that thing of just like the kind of beloved animal kind of thing. Like the character, their death kind of almost hits harder than if it was just a human character. But yeah, kind of like Yang Chen in the kind of following scene, you're just kind of like, whoa, how do we come back from that? Because they had actually done a decent job about like kind of characterizing Nujian as like, it can be sometimes tricky to differentiate different Sky Bison from each other, but there was enough little scenes of like Kavik's favorite member of the team, Nujian. Jujinta loves Nujian. They're kind of messing around trying to get Nujian's attention. Nujian loves kind of waltzing through the streets in parades. You get the moment where like Nujian's, his older sister is Mingyur's bison, and you get the moment of those two interacting. And so they did the job of kind of building up the idea that like this is a member of the team. And so when they finally sort of connect the dots and are like, this was the second like companion to die protecting Yang Chen, it's like that's what FCE had set up before in the Kyoshi books. The idea that two companions of and friends of Yang Chen died protecting her, and one of them was her Sky Bison. I don't think anyone called it, but it's really strong because then on the kind of Yang Chen connection with Nujian highlights the constant idea of the idea that like it is the animal companion connection, spirit guide, animal guide connection, as well as just air nomad and Sky Bison, that they have a almost telepathic connection, that she can fly Nujian without using the reins, and really, really cool stuff. Even the kind of hero moment from Nujian in the chapter Gravity, where there's the rock slide and Yang Chen's looking for help from everyone, but everyone, the villagers are running away, her team is a bit too far away. It's Nujian first, and then the other Sky Bison come in to kind of hold up the rock slide while Yang Chen gets some space to do the avatar state. Just like they do the work to make that death meaningful. And it's not just like Nujian was only ever the method of transport, and then they killed off the Sky Bison and it was just the animal died, so it's sad. No, it's like there was a character there, and I think the work was done to make that like really hit home, that like that's a big moment. So very, very kind of emotional moment there. Let's see what else. Yeah, I suppose I should probably mention this actually. Yeah. Lauga. So one thing I've learned, and maybe this is one of the things I just noticed it more recently, but like there is a real obsession in the fandom that has read the books with Lauga. Now I understand why. Like, super interesting character, the idea of this basically almost like ageless character who has theoretically been around for so many eras. Like the idea of like he has multiple identities, he's this like earthbending assassin who has done all this stuff, he's this guru. He could be anyone you see in any era, like prior to his introduction, basically. Even afterwards, like we don't know what happened to him. So like he could just turn up everywhere. But there is a thing of like just people being like, what if that character was Lao Ge? And in this case, like I just don't think there was any moment where there was like Lao Ge is here. Could he be part of the Order of the White Lotus? Maybe, but probably not. So, I don't know. It's an interesting one because obviously the idea now is that there's sort of a certain amount of pressure in a way on when is the next time we see this character? What era will he pop up in, and under what identity, and to do what? Or what happens? Because like there's a bunch of things they could do with him. Because like imagine he goes rogue later on in Kyoshi's era, and so like a 200-year-old Kyoshi has to hunt down her previous master, who's like 2,000 years old or something like that. There's some very cool stuff that you could do with the character. Otherwise, like it's one of those things where like I'm completely on board with the idea that like he's a super cool character, always interesting to speculate about, because there's all this kind of like mention about like, oh, he killed an Earth King in the past. Which king was it? And the numbers on the Earth King, they're very careful these days about throwing those numbers out there, because I think if they put out a number without planning it out, they're gonna create another kind of weird continuity error. So I think I understand why they're being cautious about kind of doing reveals in the way like that, where it's like super specific like that, but hopefully they can work on that to make it fit. So yeah, Feishan. It would be really interesting though, like if they kind of do something in like Yang Chen's era where like Feishan just does become this like even more mercurial, kind of even more of a madman than kind of he already is. And Yang Chen is kind of like maybe thinking like, do I have to take out the Earth King, because he's really going like off the deep end here? And then all of a sudden there's just word that like the king has been killed, and it's like this subtle reveal that like this is when Lao Ge struck. I think those are the sort of connections that everyone was maybe waiting for in this book, was just to hear something like that in like the final chapter of like, you know, final chapters just like Feishan just on his own. And you kind of do like he did to kind of, what was it, Zoryu in the book. He just turns up in the window, but this time you actually see him go through with the kill here. That would be a bit of a kind of interesting reveal of like, this is the guy here, and this is how he went down. But you know, I like it. I as much as I joke about like the fandom, just like everyone is Lao Ge, it's always one to keep an eye out for, because it's such an interesting concept as like the characters who can live long enough to be in like multiple eras, and just what their goal is as a character. Yeah, and then there's maybe the slight problem of like, in a way, can like previous avatars have met Lao Ge? But I suppose that's the thing with a lot of the avatars, is like, how often do they use the idea of like a previous avatar encountered like the very same character or something related to that character, and then like they know extra information because of that. It's a tough one, because like Lao Ge could know lots of information about previous avatars that he's kind of lived through without ever interacting with any of them until Kyoshi, but still an interesting one, because like he knew the whole thing about like what Karuk is like the hunter, and in kind of like in more ways than one in a way. Like he kind of knew that. He knew the kind of Shoken thing. Yang Chen read Shoken, I think. It's an interesting one. Lao Ge is Zhaibao. That's an interesting one. They're probably in the same category overall. These two characters are just like, everyone in any ATLA content going forward is going to be looking for Zhaibao to see the early formation of the Red Lotus and Order of the White Lotus stuff, because we know like Iroh knows this guy, so we're waiting for him to show up, and then we're like, what about this guy? Does it make sense, Zhaibao? Honestly, the connection is pretty good actually, because doesn't Lao Ge have a bunch of scenes where he basically is like, he's more or less like, I don't really like leaders. It's not quite like that. What is it? It's like he's kind of like, he approves in a way. He'll go ahead with the taking out of leaders who he feels like aren't. I'd have to go back and read it, but it's something along the lines of like, what is it? Like he respects the leaders who will just kind of like do the things that kind of need to be done, but maybe like he doesn't like light rulers or something like that, who don't do too much, which is why he kind of wanted Kyoshi to kill the young kind of leader guy on the raid, but she actually, you know, went against that. It might be an interesting one to kind of see if there's any sort of a connection to be had there between what his philosophy there was, because obviously you have the idea like he did kill a previous world leader, but then he was part of the Order of the White Lotus for a certain amount of time, but then betrayed them, so he was in line with them. There's ways to make that one work, but they probably are just different people, honestly. It's an interesting one. See, technically the White Lotus tried to take Fei Shan out, so, well, yeah, there is that. It's an interesting one, definitely. And just in terms of like the idea of like sort of noted interesting character from like the first novel, and then almost like kind of like random lore insert character about the Red Lotus, and like the connection between the two. It's an interesting one. But yeah, rife for speculation, this guy. But the problem is the speculation is effectively everything. Let's see. Okay, so let's see. Avatar Goon. I suppose we want a bit of a discussion here about Avatar Goon. Okay, so it's very personal here. Like, we don't really learn much about a lot of specifically what's going on with him. Just the idea that obviously he seemed like he was an avatar who was doing his job, kind of like Yang Chen. He is a character who did like 100 miracles effectively, but felt that the one failure here and there was always what he was remembered for, rather than the 100 things that he actually did right. Obviously, stuff happened in the era where he felt like he couldn't fully rely on people because they obviously demanded too much. Are they worthy of having a protector like the Avatar? And maybe similar things to Yang Chen. But then, of course, he has his big moment of doubt when he talks to Masosa. Then, obviously, later on, we have the big moment where a tsunami comes in, but he's there to protect the people. And the implication seems to be that he keeps that place from being wiped off the map, but his companion, Masosa, is killed in the process. And he then goes into kind of a period of isolation, because he's grieving effectively over this loss, and then comes back into the world after that. But the tsunami incident is considered a failure because I suppose he didn't fully prevent it, because his companion died. There's probably the implication that some other people died, but he overall saved the city from and kept it as a city and not just a place completely wiped out. I definitely wish we knew a little bit more about the character, but I do like the sort of consistency of they kind of in a way gave us information on one named new avatar kind of across the Yang Chen books, and they went into a little bit of depth in terms of kind of making this character who kind of has a somewhat similar path, or at least issues that they faced as Yang Chen. And that's what made the scene where Yang Chen speaks as Goon in front of Kavik particularly effective, because Kavik is he's kind of prepared, a Yunarak told him that this might happen around Yang Chen. But for him to sort of see an avatar talk about what if I just gave up? What if I just gave up on humanity and stopped trying? Is this truly shocking thing to hear? And he's even thinking to himself what would the Order of White Lotus think if they knew that this happened? Because a Yunarak and some of the other characters seem to have this sort of sense that all of the avatars are literally just these incredible, amazing people who are all kind of perfect. Maybe some of them are noted for bigger issues, but many of them created giant eras of peace and stuff like that, and they're kind of defined by general kind of success. But then you get this kind of other side that a character who is this close to giving up, and then Yang Chen was also that close to giving up. It's very interesting. There's the bounty hunter avatar reference. Now, this is a very one line reference. It's hard to even read into it and almost lock it in as a complete fact, but it's pretty much said right there. I'd love to know the details on kind of what exactly this is and what it means. Is it just that there's a previous era that is sort of Dao Fei-esque, and so this avatar took the approach of kind of just being okay, I'm going to clean up the world by taking in the bounties, and maybe some sort of a code where I'm not going to kill anyone, I'm going to actually imprison them, but I'm actually going to just go hunting for criminals across the world. It's an interesting concept for an avatar. I wonder, will the new comic, the June and Iroh one, will it address maybe some more interesting details about kind of what it is to be a bounty hunter in the Avatar world? Is there a kind of Dao Fei connection inherently when you are a bounty hunter? Is there a bit of a code to it? because we've done that with kind of like the pirates and stuff like that. Dao Fei groups is like established that there's more of a sense of honor to it to a certain extent, and there's like a history at least that June seems to have as a bounty hunter. So what does that mean? Or is it literally just an era where people hunted each other and it was more Wild West-esque? So yeah, let's see, in chat mentioned there we have Avatar Salai, not mentioned in this book, but of course a very interesting character overall, in terms of, in the Kyoshi books, this is like the character presented as being the Avatar most noted for being like a particularly like fantastic Avatar. Like, effectively, the legacy that Yang Chen goes on to have is effectively the one that Salai has prior to this. So it's interesting. So this is one of the more noted avatars prior to the characters that we know of. And other than just like another brilliant avatar, did a lot for the world, we don't really know much about it. Oh yes, there was the Salai's shoes explanation here, which is kind of like one of those things like, oh, does the character at some point in one of these books say like La's fins or something like that? But there's all these kind of random references and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, it is an Avatar referenced in the novels who we might expect to learn about at some point. If they don't do the thing where they maybe like switch up what element we're going to, like, maybe there's an opportunity to do Salai perhaps, but again, we don't know what element Salai is from at all. There's room for it to be kind of pretty much anyone. I think most people agree the name feels more kind of firebender or earthbender, probably. It doesn't obviously come across as a water tribe name, but they've had odd names for specific characters before, but it's interesting. So there's that. Okay, yeah. I think I roughly touched on this before, but let's see. End of the... So, the end of the Platinum Affair. Like, based on the end of the book, how do we actually end the Platinum Affair? So, what actually, I suppose, technically is it? So, it's... Because of what happened before, Fei Shan specifically chose to kind of step the Earth Kingdom back from... doing trade with the Fire Nation and the Water Tribes. They, to save face, basically did the same. Then, because they each all wanted products that the other had, knew that trade needed to happen, so this is where the 4 Shang cities were established. At roughly points kind of meant to represent sort of like north, south, east, west, so the whole world is covered and you can do kind of complete world trade. This is how trade is conducted, that because the nations don't want to deal with each other, instead they'll deal with these sort of like, nation among nation kind of trade cities. Yang Chen now is the leader of all of them, and her plan is to basically use the fact that she has the wealth of all of them to more or less, at the very least, even it out, and then anything left over, help the rest of the world. So the idea, I think, at that point is that she is probably doing so much of the work. The Shang cities themselves probably aren't really even being run by that many Shang cities. And if the world trade is functioning as well as possible, without the Shang merchants, without Zongdus, except the Avatar, I suppose there's a certain point at which it almost is just back to normal, except we happen to have some cities that are more notable for trade in the world, that if you just remove the name from them, it is fundamentally the nations just trading with each other. And then it really comes down to more of a just directly behind the scenes. Like, are the leaders actually willing to work with each other? Which Yang Chen has obviously prevented a war from happening, because it was on the verge of happening. She prevents that basically with Ying Su, that Fei Shan doesn't ever want to have a combustion bender coming after him. So he's kind of kept in his place, meaning the other nations don't have to get their defenses up and running because of that. And I guess at future like convocations, it turns it into just a meeting of the world leaders, because she's the only Zongdu. So in the next year's convocation, it would just be Yang Chen meeting with the 3 world leaders. And I'm guessing after a year of relative success, they would have to listen to what she says, because it's basically her being proven right from the start of like the first book that, you know, I have all these techniques where if you help me, I will make you a lot of money. And people just being like, why would we take your help? But it's true. And now we're going to see the result of that she is probably going to make world trade like effortless, better than it's ever been. These 4 cities will probably become the shining beacons across the world, all 4 of them. The implication would probably be that surrounding areas would improve as well. She's able to use extra profits to help other places. And at that point, why would they disagree with her? Now, there's still the issue of course, Fei Shan doesn't like the other 2 world leaders because of what they did. I think there's still the requirement from him that there be a real sense of like, they need to truly step up, like, and like apologize in the highest order to me, and really make an effort, and maybe he'll agree to it. Now, Yang Chen can maybe force Fei Shan's hand a little bit here, but I think for the sake of like, this is your negotiation for world peace, I'm not sure this is maybe the opportunity to use the combustion bending threat to force world peace. That's a little bit like, not great. I'm guessing maybe it's just one of those things where maybe you have to wait for the next water tribe chief to come into power, the next Fire Lord to come into power, and maybe then that's when Fei Shan will be more willing to kind of end things on his side, and the actual tension between the nations kind of more fades away. There's also the other more technical point, which is where I think it was said that the Platinum Affair is like, trade will stop until this platinum badger mole statue tarnishes fully, which they said would take 100 years. So I don't know. So the implication would be that like, either way it ends realistically, I suppose, probably once Fei Shan dies, which realistically is under 100 years. It's just a case of like, does it happen much quicker because of Yang Chen's success? Probably. I think that probably has to be the answer. That we know from what we're told about her is that she does all these treaties, and it's really incredible what she was able to do. I guess she does effectively end the Platinum Affair. But again, it depends on how long she lives, because we just don't know the idea. Because speaking of that, I suppose, probably an interesting time. This is an interesting topic. Ultimately, there's nothing to go on. It's just pure speculation, because like, we just don't have the ability to do it. Everything kind of fits together once we know like how long she lived until. The implication from the book would be that she maybe doesn't live the longest life of any avatar, because they really hit the point home hard, is that like, she is pushing herself to like an insane degree. She's barely sleeping, and then she's using basically this like crazy spirit tea in kind of insane quantities all day, like every day, to stay up. Now, Kavik is kind of back. Things are better at the end of the book, so I suppose her dependency on that to kind of keep going, she probably will get more rest. It maybe shouldn't be as much of a problem, so I wouldn't be expecting like super young or anything like that. But, you know, is Yang Chen a character who's going to live 100 plus years? Probably not. Like, I assume probably Yang Chen is probably a character who's maybe like 80 something when she dies, lives a like long but not super long life, enough to where it feels like she lives long enough to kind of outlive the rulers that she kind of were there when she was born, and see things into a little bit of a different era. Because otherwise, like, the idea of like, the only thing you can use to figure out Yang Chen's age potentially is the fact that like she made deals with the spirits that sort of were broken, maybe inactive by the time Karuk came around, but even that's very difficult to do because the spirits have such a weird sense of time, and it's kind of tricky because there was a very specific deal with the Saowon clan, and we don't know how much the other ones were about. But I don't know. I suppose it gives you the sense that, like, yeah, it's probably not a huge time. Like, again, like I said, just not, Yang Chen isn't a 100+ year avatar potentially, but that's I think really all there is to kind of speculate about. Let's see. Could you make a video about all the Avatar books that have ever come out? This is one of those ones where, like, yes, I do want to make an updated version of the sort of like kind of how to get into Avatar comics and novels, but I'm waiting for the next Korra comic to be announced before I get working on that. I also don't want to just like directly repeat everything from the previous video, so it's a very tricky one where, like, if I include every book, it's a thing that's, I'm there all day talking about all these books that ultimately a lot of people don't really need to look at. So I kind of want to focus it in on just the really like obvious stuff. It's always going to be a tricky one about like how much I focus on, how much I don't. It's a bit of an interesting one. But yeah, at some point I will do an updated like notable books video. I don't know exactly when or what exactly I'll do with it, but I'll do something. Gotta make a video, live stream ranking Avatar villains on a tier list. Villains on a tier list. Maybe. I just wonder, is that like a ranking that's actually like interesting to do? It's maybe something like not maybe one I'm rushing out to do like immediately, but like if I'm really just don't have a topic, yeah, maybe some sort of a villain style discussion with some light ranking might be something that could be interesting. Find some way to annoy the Azula fans, even though I myself am an Azula fan. But I'm also like, I feel like the video I focused the most on wording super correctly was when I did my non-spoiler review for the Azula comic that's coming out in October. I was so careful in the way I was wording things just because I know how some Azula fans can be. And even then, I'm still expecting to see some sort of a thing where like the book finally comes out, people go back to my review and were like, I interpreted this completely differently than you. This is not my Azula. And I'm like, that's how I see the character. Sorry. That's just the way it's going to be when there's a character who just has different groups within the fandom who interpret her kind of very differently. Video on Earth Kingdom history. I wish we knew more Earth Kingdom history. The Fire Nation one I think was interesting to do because at least there was like sort of a quote unquote origin story to it. Whereas the problem with Earth Kingdom history is that we're kind of talking extraordinarily broadly early on, because we don't even have a lot of like Earth stuff going on in the Wan era to kind of connect us to. Whereas at least with the Fire Nation video, like we had the whole idea of that line turtle kind of was the pseudo origin of the Fire Nation, and there's a couple of other little bits and pieces to focus on. Whereas the Earth Kingdom history video, if I was to make it, just feels like super scattered, where it's just random one-off statements of like a couple of thousand years ago, Ba Sing Se forms as an underground place. Then a little bit later on, it is built overground. And there's I don't know if we know enough like detail to kind of make a video that isn't just like kind of, and then this happened and this happened and this happened, but there's no real maybe discussion as such to be had about it. It's a very open topic that I'm not sure there's enough like specifics to kind of go into. That's kind of just my thoughts with some of that stuff about like how it's kind of all awkward to kind of do, especially the Earth Kingdom, with just how kind of broad it is, and the point being made in the Kyoshi books about how like in so many ways like it's such a big nation that like there's like the history of like Central Earth Kingdom, the history of this part of the Earth Kingdom, rather than like stuff affecting the overall nation and so on. Have I thought about doing an updated top 20 Benders video? Not anytime soon. I'd say. I like talking about the kind of, quote unquote power ranking stuff, but I also don't like talking about it like with certain people. Is probably the best way to say it, where there's a specific approach to some of those discussions that happens when you start to have more of a like direct, we're doing a versus battle type thing, we're doing power ranking stuff, and it's just a style of discussion that just kind of frustrates me to kind of no end. The kind of way it evolves, and the kind of, trying to make it super specific when fundamentally it is just this very kind of broad character power analysis thing. It's one that like I'll probably do it like eventually someday. Probably want to see a few more additions with characters and stuff like that. But I also kind of don't want to do it again, kind of for like the Azula reasons as well, of like I come in there, I don't put Azula as like the top firebender, and suddenly I'm the worst person in the world, and I kind of don't really want to deal with that necessarily. But it's one of those things, like never rule it out, but have to be prepared heading into a discussion like that. Do you think Yang Chen had a peasant uprising in Ba Sing Se like Kyoshi? No, because in the first book it was noted that Fei Shan actually treats the lower ring of Ba Sing Se pretty well. It's kind of implied that that is sort of maybe just out of a sense of making himself look good, but he actually seemed to show some sense of care. So it doesn't actually seem like a peasant uprising would potentially happen in Fei Shan's era as Earth King. That's an interesting one. Let's see. Zito means minister. Salai is a medical herb. Could Salai have been a herbalist? Interesting. Like that would be interesting if like he was the Earth Avatar and like he's from like Taku and like he's related to like herbalists and stuff like that. There's a way to connect this stuff together in a kind of interesting way. I kind of feel though if we were in Taku, we probably would have mentioned that like potentially one of the somewhat recent avatars was actually like from around here. But you know, it's always kind of interesting to note like some of that stuff, but also just like a direct translation of a character's name maybe doesn't tell you like a lot, especially when it's like, you know, the first avatar's name is Juan and stuff like that, and it's like let's see, I do wonder if the Wars of Daggers and Secrets may have been related to Fei Shan, as according to the RPG, the Yellowneck Uprising was a result from that, as it was unchecked. That's interesting. Let's see. It's one of those ones I probably have to go back and reread some of the RPG information. Let me just quickly actually open up that. Do I have it here? That's the Wan Shi Tong Adventure Guide, role-playing game. Okay. Okay, so let's do... Okay, so just to have full context for what we're talking about here. So that question is War of Secrets and Daggers and how this relates to kind of stuff in the era. So this is awkward. Display, and I'll move this over. There we go. Okay, so if you're not familiar with this, okay, the War of Secrets and Daggers were collectively a succession conflict between the Earth King princes in Ba Sing Se that coincided with the Yellowneck Uprising. So this is obviously a Kyoshi era thing. So obviously this is happening, 30 years after the Karuk, 32, like Karuk's whole time, and then going into Kyoshi's era, which is when she's a teenager. So this is sort of stuff that happens like 5 50 years after Yang Chen's era comes to an end, after she dies, we get the idea that there is a succession conflict between Earth Kingdom princes. Let's see. Conflict. Earth Kingdom had an extensive royal family, with each person in line for the throne desiring the title of Earth Monarch. That is an interesting one. In terms of like, obviously at some point, whatever happens is that, like, I guess Feishan is part of the quote unquote royal family, and then his children or whatever, something happens like a generation or two into the future after that. And then of course you wonder as well, like, where the whole assassination of one of the kings kind of comes into play. Is that before this? Is that in the middle of all of this? It's a bit of an interesting one overall. But yeah, that's just that one there. Again, I would definitely recommend people, if you haven't read the RPG stuff, to check it out if you can, because there are some kind of interesting like lore elements here. There's obviously like this, there's the Roku era stuff and so on, but just interesting stuff. So I suppose I'll put out the final call here for any questions here before I wrap up the stream. So any final things you want to mention here? Let's see, it's several generations, this is 100 years in the future. Okay, let's see, what's this? What non-Avatar focused stories would you love to be told in a novel format? Non-Avatar focused stories. Okay. Let me actually try and think about this. Well, there's I suppose the obvious one. It would probably involve the Avatar to a certain extent, but I'd say that the core of the story is probably just involving like Water Tribe characters. It's like the formation of the Southern Water Tribe. Like, what was the actual like incident that really made that happen? I'd love to see kind of the different kind of factions form, how the split really happened, and then like did the Avatar from that era actually get involved in that? That's a pretty obvious like story. I've always been interested in like if they ever decided to tell a story that is like kind of completely focused on the spirits. I think that would be very interesting to just kind of see a story where it's mainly just like spirits interacting with other spirits and just kind of seeing kind of what they do, and like which ones like have a desire to kind of like accomplish something, which ones don't. Just some sort of an interesting story about like spirits, maybe some notable ones kind of doing something. It's kind of an interesting one to me. Do you think the franchise will ever go back to early Avatars like the first 4? I feel like they're too hesitant to ever commit to it. I think everything is on the table for Avatar Studios. Obviously, it is so difficult to say anything with certainty about Avatar Studios, but I think what they've said, it feels like they're putting everything out there. I think they know there's probably some sort of demand to do that sort of stuff. Will they ever just directly do them? I'm not sure. Like, I know everyone wants the second Avatar to just see like how it actually kind of works out. Like, I can see them maybe doing something where like they maybe don't go for the second Avatar, but they go for like the 10th Avatar or something like that. Because just the idea of maybe just broadly filling in the timeline a little bit rather than specifically filling in every avatar. I can see kind of some sense of doing that. And then maybe when you have more big picture items on the timeline overall, then you do the more specific kind of one by one kind of style stuff. That's kind of what I want to see, is just kind of more kind of filling in the gaps rather than just kind of maybe like creating like lots of gaps. Like I don't mind like gaps in the past and stuff like that, but you know, they need to make a decision to expand on some stuff eventually. What do you think of the approach to prequels? Do you think they did enough with what we know about Yang Chen and the Avatar world in general in the novels? Like, I think that the novels have been like a hugely important kind of thing overall, just to kind of highlight kind of what's going on. Like, it's something we obviously like need to the depth that the novels can offer, because they do the kind of like narration and stuff like that. As kind of prequel material, like the approach, I suppose, with the Kyoshi novels was like, it was different and unique because obviously like you can't write the story in a way where this just directly sets up everything in Aang's era, because Kyoshi was not related to like a lot of stuff in Aang's era. So no, I think they did a good job. Like the thing with the prequels style stuff for like Avatar is weird, just because they do it on the basis of like each Avatar has their own era, and they tell it more based on the Avatar rather than just like the specific story as such. Like, because like obviously if they were to tell a direct a prequel to Avatar, they'd be telling like a 100-year war era story, and it would be one that wouldn't feature an Avatar. So this kind of like prequel, in just the sense of like you're going back in time to just tell the story of an Avatar, I think it's just always going to work for Avatar, because each Avatar more or less defines their own era, and stuff just works like that. Yeah, like there's still like lots of room to like do stuff, and stuff that's left out, where like you'd like to see like other material, like the comics, be able to fill in the gaps for the novels. Like Jujinta one shot would be something interesting. And then, as mentioned there, that like, yeah, the civil war between Fei Shan and Nong, the actual details of specifically what happened, how it happened, maybe some of his backstory would be kind of interesting. And then yeah, the whole, obviously, like what's next for the novels. I think this was kind of the first thing I answered in the stream, but I think we are getting a different author probably, and my assumption would probably be that we're either doing Roku, or I'm guessing we're probably doing a kind of relatively unknown Avatar. I think that's kind of the only real way to kind of do it, is just to work it that way. And it's hard to tell, like, depending on what author they get in, it's interesting, because FCE definitely took the approach where he felt like he needed there to be some foundation behind the character he was writing. And maybe by the end, it felt like he was a little bit more kind of cautious about truly adding big stuff to the canon, especially when like there wasn't prior kind of material there before. So I think a lot might depend actually on just like what writer we get in, and what they want to do. Of like, are they going to have an approach like that where they're only going to want to do known material, and so Roku would be a very kind of obvious one. But if we get a writer who maybe wants a little bit more freedom, and maybe they don't want to be messing around with continuity so much, that's maybe when we get our kind of unknown Avatar, or maybe we get an Avatar Salai, the story of Avatar Goon, or just an avatar we've never heard about before. Because I think there's a kind of unique aspect to that. Like, imagine we just got the announcement of the next Avatar novel, and it's just called like the something of, you know, this name we've never heard before, and it's just the article that announces it or something like that, just mentioning this like completely never before explored avatar, you know, and we're just like, wait, what? We're getting a novel about like this just unknown avatar. Like that would be a really cool thing to just go in with no information, especially if it's like far enough back that like it's hard to make a connection of like something that happens in this book would like cause the Zito era to happen. Like if it's far enough away where it's just, this is just a story to itself. I'd like to see how that works, because you can see like what they've done with the novels that they've done so far is that there's an effort to sort of establish like a Kyoshi's era. This is how it relates to sort of the Kuruk era. Kuruk's era relates to the Yang Chen era. Kyoshi's era leads into Roku's era, and so on. Like just this section of the timeline that covers this kind of 500-year-ish kind of period or whatever. This is in general what it's like, and the kind of ups and downs. And you can see this in the RPG, especially if you read it about more of the kind of geopolitical stuff across the eras. I like to just go in and just have no clue. Like I said at the start, imagine we went far enough back where it's like Ba Sing Se is just an underground city and it's not quite the capital of the Earth Kingdom yet. That's a really cool concept, because that's probably an era where like Omashu is maybe your Earth Kingdom capital or something like that, and you kind of like it's a different Earth Kingdom. It's an entirely different world, because key elements that we know happen later just aren't here in this era. Like in a way, there's something like knowing in beginnings that they couldn't have gone to Ba Sing Se because it wasn't there. We had no foundation for where anywhere was, basically, is an interesting concept. As for when we'll get the announcement, that's the tricky thing of like, I suppose just like in the chat there, do you think we are getting a novel, say like July 2024? Is there going to be a book for 2024? Probably like announced in like February, like they typically do, released in July. I struggle with it, where based on the history, there's a gap after a duology. But with a new author, is that the case? You feel like with Avatar Studios in place, it shouldn't be the case where there's a big gap. There should be a sense of like the structure flowing quite well. But Avatar Studios has not really proven itself to be this thing that is just a well-oiled machine that just kind of works. And I think it's going to be really unfortunate if 2024 doesn't deliver, because it then suddenly puts a lot of pressure on Avatar Studios to deliver and just everything to work out really, really well. But yeah, I think the impression I get from the chat is that not a lot of confidence for a novel next year. The communication, I don't know, doesn't seem super strong. But I suppose it's one of those things where like the kind of Yang Chen book was eventually more or less just kind of announced out of the blue, the first one, when it did happen. We now know it's a full-on series, Chronicles of the Avatar. I'd like to hope, but I would say probably I'd be a little bit surprised if we get to February and it's like, hey, here's the book you were waiting for. But that's the thing, like they need stuff for 2024, because like at this stage I'm almost like the 2025 movie, like October 2025 for the first movie, like I don't know, at this point I'm almost like, is that gonna stick. I don't know. We don't know how everything going on now with all the strikes is affecting stuff. I don't think animation's as badly affected, but there's, some impact somewhere in the process, obviously. So yeah, we're waiting to see what happens there. But yeah, probably going to end it there. We've had quite a lot of discussion. We've got through this giant document about like characters and stuff like that. So yeah, next stream obviously will be September. Probably late-ish September, probably around this time. It will be post Quest for Balance, so I'm not sure. It depends what happens. Like, are we expecting news in September? I don't really know. So the September stream might end up just being sort of like some sort of a gameplay stream for the Avatar Quest for Balance game, assuming it like releases on schedule and stuff like that. That will be the initial sort of like, probably that's what it will be, because I think the game's going to come out on a Friday, Sunday stream seems like a decent thing to do. But otherwise, as ever, like if there's giant news, an impromptu live stream will happen. Otherwise, usual videos and stuff like that. But yes, thanks everyone for coming out to the stream. And yeah, that has been it for the August stream this year. Continuing up the trend of trying to do a stream every month. But thanks for coming out. Thanks for watching, and bye.